Prologue. The salt air from the Black Sea burns my lungs, but not as much as the memory of her. I stand on this cliff, wind cutting through me, and all I can think about is Elara. My hand moves to the tattoo on my forearm without thinking. Her eyes perfectly inked into my skin when I was 17 and stupid enough to believe love lasted forever. She was everything to me. Everything. I close my eyes and I'm back there, 16 years old, hiding in the vineyard behind her family's house. The sun was warm on our faces, and she was laughing at something I'd said, probably something ridiculous. God, her laugh. It was the sound that made sense of the world. When she looked at me, really looked at me, I felt like I could conquer anything, like I was worth something. Elara wasn't just my first love, she was my first glimpse of what happiness could feel like. Before her, my world was all duty and expectations, my father's stern voice, and the weight of a name I never asked for. But with her, I was just a boy who made her smile. She'd trace patterns on my chest and tell me about the books she was reading, the places she wanted to see. We'd plan our escape from this life, whisper about running away together, starting fresh somewhere no one knew our last names. She was my morning thought and my last prayer. The reason I learned to play guitar, because she mentioned once that she loved music. The reason I started reading poetry, because she'd quote lines that made her eyes light up. I memorized the way she took her tea, the songs that made her cry, the exact shade of gold her hair turned in September sunlight. I got the tattoo because I needed her with me always. Not just the idea of her, but her actual eyes watching over me. The artist thought I was crazy, spending 3 sessions getting every detail perfect. Each lash, the tiny fleck of green in the blue, the way they crinkled when she smiled. But it had to be exact. She was exact. She was everything. Then my father died. Not just died, was murdered by her father. Arkady Borodin, the man who'd sat at our dinner table every Sunday, who'd called my father brother. The man my father loved and trusted above all others put a bullet in his head, and just like that, everything shattered. The girl who'd been my whole world became the daughter of my enemy. The love that had filled every corner of my heart turned poison. Because how do you love someone when their father has taken everything from you? How do you look at those eyes, the same ones now burned into my skin, and not see betrayal? I have to hurt her. I have to make her father pay. The only way to break Arkady Borodin is to break his daughter's heart. And the only person who can do that, the only person she trusts enough to devastate her completely, is me. The tattoo burns against my skin like a brand. Her eyes, watching me make the choice to destroy the only thing that ever mattered to me. She was everything. She was my everything. And now I have to make her nothing. Chapter 1. The skyline of Moscow stretched before me, a glittering panorama of steel and glass that had replaced the ancient cobblestones of my childhood memories. Years had passed since I last walked these streets without a ghost at my back, since the world fractured into before and after. Now, after was my reality, a landscape sculpted by meticulous planning and a searing, unyielding vengeance. I stood in my new penthouse office, the air crisp with the scent of ambition and money, a stark contrast to the Black Sea's bitter tang. From this height, the city seemed a chessboard, and I, finally, was ready to play my opening move. My initial focus was on Arkady Borodin, of course. Everything else was merely prologue. He was the cancer that had consumed my family, and I was the surgeon ready to excise him piece by agonizing piece. My thoughts were consumed by the desire for revenge, a relentless, burning fire that had shaped every decision, every sacrifice. I had spent years honing my craft, not with a pistol in a back alley, but with codes and contracts, with markets and mergers. My empire was legitimate on paper, a sprawling network of import-export, tech startups, and intricate financial instruments. But beneath the polished facade, every venture, every acquisition, every negotiation was designed with one ultimate goal: to choke Arkady's power, to dismantle his legacy, brick by painstaking brick. He might control the old world, but I was the shadow lurking in the new. Elara. The name was a silent curse, a secret pain that I buried so deep, sometimes even I forgot it existed. I actively suppressed any lingering affection for her, viewing her purely as a means to an end against her father. She was Arkady's most precious vulnerability, his Achilles heel, and I would exploit it without mercy. Every thought of the girl I once adored was a weakness, a chink in my armor that I couldn't afford. The years of silence between us had been a deliberate cultivation of distance, a barren landscape where no sentiment could survive. She was irrelevant to the boy I was, but essential to the man I had become. I walked over to the sprawling tactical map that dominated one wall, an interactive display glowing with real-time data. It outlined Arkady's labyrinthine enterprises, a spiderweb of legitimate and illicit ventures. Green lines marked his legal holdings, construction firms, luxury hotels, media companies. Red lines denoted his more shadowy operations, arms dealing, human trafficking, illicit gambling. My strategy was to hit the green first, the visible, legitimate foundations. It was slower, yes, but it was cleaner, and it caused maximum public humiliation. Every legal blow would bleed into his underworld operations, weakening his support, chipping away at his authority. And more importantly, it would force him into the light, where I could pick him apart under scrutiny. "Any new intelligence on Borodin's construction bids?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Vladislav, my older brother, stepped out of the shadows, his presence a comforting anchor in the controlled chaos of my world. His shoulders, broad and solid under his bespoke suit, seemed to carry the weight of generations. His face, etched with a quiet intensity, was a stark contrast to my own carefully constructed impassivity. But his eyes, dark and unwavering, held the same burning desire for retribution that consumed me. Vladislav was the embodiment of the old ways. While I navigated the digital currents and corporate boardrooms, he managed the family's traditional operations, the muscle, the intimidation, the quiet diplomacy that kept our people safe and our enemies unsettled. His hands, though capable of signing multi-million-dollar contracts, could just as easily break a man's will. And his tattoos. They were masterpieces of pain and history, intricate patterns that started at his wrists and climbed his neck, disappearing under his collar. Each line, each symbol, told a tale of their family's trials, of our father's legacy, and of Vladislav's personal, unyielding commitment to vengeance. A coiled serpent, a broken sword, a single, defiant rose. They were his armor, his promise. "The Serpov contract is on the verge of collapse," Vladislav reported, his voice low, a gravely rumble that always reminded me of our father. He tapped a glowing point on the map, and a diagram of a massive skyscraper project flickered. Our shell corporation offered a bid 50% lower, impossible to match, but with ironclad guarantees. He's bleeding capital to keep up appearances, but his partners are getting nervous. We also have a few incidents planned for his key material suppliers. Nothing overtly violent, just enough to cause delays and cost him penalties. A ghost of a smile touched my lips, a cold, almost imperceptible curl. "Excellent. Keep the pressure on his legal avenues. Make him question every decision, every ally, and monitor Elara, not overtly, of course, just her daily routine." Vladislav's eyes, usually devoid of curiosity beyond the mission, held a flicker of something unreadable. His loyalty was absolute, owned by shared grief and a similar thirst for justice. But the mention of Elara always seemed to stir a quiet question in his gaze. He knew, intuitively, that she was central to my plan, but the true depth of my past with her, the raw, bleeding wound she represented, was something I consciously hid from him. He saw the hatred, the strategic necessity. He didn't see the love that had twisted into it. "She's been at the gallery, as usual, isolated. Still dresses in those muted colors," Vladislav noted, his tone flat, observational. "Borodin is paranoid. He's increased her security detail, thinking someone will go after her as leverage against him." "He's not wrong to be paranoid," I murmured, my gaze fixed on the map, specifically on the glowing representation of Arkady's headquarters. "He just doesn't understand the nature of my attack." My revenge wasn't crude, wasn't about simply eliminating him. It was about dismantling him, atom by agonizing atom. It was about making him watch as everything he held dear crumbled, before finally delivering the ultimate blow. And Elara, his daughter, the innocent girl who still carried the burden of his sins, was the perfect mirror for his torment. She was the reflection of his weakness, and she would reflect my hatred straight back into his eyes. The tattoo on my arm pulsed, a silent throb beneath the sleeve of my expensive shirt. Elara's eyes. Once a symbol of my boundless devotion, now a bitter, mocking reminder of the love that had been shattered and transformed into the most potent weapon in my arsenal. I adjusted the cuff, hiding it, burying it. The past was dead. Only the future, a future built on Arkady's ruin, mattered. And Elara, whether she knew it or not, was merely the instrument of its coming.
Chapter 2. The grand piano in the drawing room stood silent, its polished surface reflecting the muted sepia-toned light filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. 5 years. 5 years since the keys last danced under my fingers, since I last found even a fleeting solace in music. 5 years since Sergei Belov's death, a cataclysmic event that had not merely ended a life, but shattered my world, transforming every vibrant hue into a permanent, suffocating grayscale. And 5 years since Igor vanished, taking with him not just the boy I loved, not just the promise of a shared future, but the very possibility of light and joy in my existence. His absence was a gaping, festering wound that refused to heal. My life had since become a carefully orchestrated pantomime of normalcy, a series of empty, hollow rituals. Waking each morning felt like donning a costume, the muted grays and blues of my wardrobe, shades that perfectly mirrored the desolate landscape of my heart. I would attend to my duties at the Serpov Gallery, curating beauty I could no longer truly appreciate, my movements precise, mechanical. Then I would return to a house that grew colder and emptier with each passing day, its opulent rooms feeling more like a gilded prison. My father, Arkady, moved through its suffocating grandeur like a phantom, his once booming laughter replaced by hushed, frantic phone calls and a simmering, toxic paranoia that I could feel prickling at my skin, a constant, low-level hum of dread. He built new alliances, fortified his sprawling empire, expanding its reach into darker, more dangerous territories. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could fill the gaping void Igor had left in me. For 2 of those agonizing years, I had clung to hope with a desperate, white-knuckled grip, a foolish, persistent ember in the ashes of my ruined world. I wrote letters, dozens of them, each one a raw, rambling confession of grief, confusion, and a love so tenacious it refused to die. Every word was a silent prayer, a desperate whisper hurled into the abyss, addressed to every contact I could think of, every old address, every shadow where he might be hiding. I called numbers that had long been disconnected, their sterile tones mocking my desperation. I sent messages through intermediaries, polite, well-meaning men who returned with blank stares, curt dismissals, or sympathetic, pitying glances that only deepened my humiliation, reminding me of my helplessness. Every unanswered plea chipped away at my soul, a slow, agonizing erosion of the girl who once believed in a love that could conquer all. The silence from his end wasn't just absence, it was a deliberate, crushing repudiation. It was him telling me, without a single word, that I was no longer worthy of his notice, his fury, or even his contempt. I knew, with a terrible, undeniable certainty that had burrowed deep into my bones, that Igor must hate me. How could he not? My father, Arkady Borodin, the man who was supposed to protect us, had committed an unforgivable sin against Sergei Belov, against Igor's father, against the very man he once called his brother. The details of that betrayal, the intimate, horrifying depths of it, the raw, personal nature of my father's treachery, remained a shadowy, unspoken secret within the family. But its consequences were brutally, irrevocably clear. Igor was gone because of my father. My childhood, my innocence, the future I had dreamt of, all gone, all because of my father. I would watch my father, Arkady, as he paced his study late into the night, a silhouette against the city lights, murmuring into the phone, his face etched with a desperate strain. He had once been my hero, strong and unyielding, a force of nature. Now I saw a man consumed by his own ambition, blind to the wreckage he had left in his wake, deaf to the silent cries of those he had wounded. He never spoke of Sergei, never acknowledged the depth of the bond he had severed. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a ruthless vigilance, a relentless focus on the next threat. He reinforced his security, barked orders at his men, obsessed over every rival, every potential danger to his empire. He was so busy protecting his empire, protecting himself, that he didn't see he had shattered my world, condemned me to a lonely purgatory. His paranoia was a tangible thing, a thick, suffocating blanket that draped itself over our lives. Every new business deal, every whispered rumor of a competitor sent tremors through the house. He would scrutinize documents for hours, his brow furrowed, his eyes darting. He hired new security details, changed his routes, installed more cameras. He spoke of unseen forces, old enemies, those who would seek to capitalize on weakness. He never named names, but the underlying current of fear was palpable. He was a caged animal, pacing, sniffing the air for a threat that he seemed to perceive growing, closer and more insistent with each passing day. He dismissed these growing pressures, publicly, as mere bumps in the road, the usual jostling for power in a cutthroat world. But I saw the subtle, undeniable fear in his eyes, the tremor in his hand, when he spoke of the new breed of adversaries, those who fought with different weapons, in different arenas. I saw his movements grow more frantic, his alliances more desperate, his empire beginning to creak under an unseen pressure. And I, trapped within these crumbling walls, felt only the slow, cold dread that the inevitable reckoning was drawing closer. It was a terrifying, suffocating wait for a storm I knew was coming, but from a direction I could not yet discern.
Chapter 3. The holographic display lit up the room, casting patterns of data across the dark wooden table. I sat in my underground command center, a cold, quiet place built for focus. Far above, the city buzzed with heat and noise, but down here, everything was calm and calculated. I had spent years planning this moment, my first real move against Arkady Borodin. He built his empire on lies, using his company, Serpov Construction, to hide his crimes. On the outside, it looked like a successful business, but I knew the truth. I had studied every detail, found every weakness. This wasn't just about taking his money. It was about destroying the false image he had created, brick by brick. Start phase 1. Protocol Rust, I said. Vladislav, my brother, stood nearby. He nodded, saying nothing. We were different in how we fought. He was the enforcer, I was the planner. But he understood the importance of this step. The lights reflected off his tattoos, each one telling part of our family's dark past. On the screen, code began to scroll. Our digital trap was now active. We had been waiting for this, watching, planting quiet problems into Arkady's systems over the years. Now those problems were beginning to grow. A voice came through my earpiece. The bid for the federal city project has been flagged. Auditors are being sent in. I let a small smile form, just as planned. We didn't want the problems to be obvious, only enough to raise questions. I wanted Arkady to think the failure was his fault. I wanted his allies to doubt him, to wonder if he was slipping. Every missed call, every emergency meeting he had to attend would chip away at his power. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. For my father, for everything Arkady had taken from us, and soon it would reach her too. Elara, she was Arkady's daughter. Once, she meant everything to me. Now, she was a part of the pain I carried. I knew she would step in once the damage grew. She was his heart, his pride. Seeing her hurt would hurt him more than anything else, and I was ready to face her again, not with love, but with purpose. I walked over to the window and stared at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Arkady was starting to feel the pressure. And soon, Elara would too. Is the Serpov gallery deal ready? I asked Vladislav. Yes, he said. We've been buying it piece by piece. Arkady's trying to sell assets to keep his company afloat, which makes the gallery even easier to take. The gallery, a place Elara cared deeply about. She loved the art, the peace it brought her. Taking it from her would not just be a blow to Arkady's public image, it would strike at something personal, something sacred, and it would force her to see me again. I braced myself for that meeting. I wouldn't show her kindness. I wouldn't let her see any part of the boy she once knew. I had buried that part of me long ago. Now I was only a shadow, shaped by pain and driven by revenge. Move forward, I said. Make sure Arkady feels it, and make sure Elara knows. This wasn't just about winning. It was about making Arkady lose everything. His money, his power, his peace. And most of all, making him watch as the one person he tried to protect the most, his daughter, became part of his downfall.
Chapter 4. The scent of midnight irises, so unexpected and out of place, hit me the moment I stepped into the Serpov gallery. It wasn't the usual faint aroma of oil paint and old paper. This was sharper, sweeter, yet tinged with an inexplicable melancholy. My steps faltered as I walked past the reception desk. On a small, unobtrusive marble pedestal, nestled among a display of antique sculptures, sat a delicate cluster of the velvety, deep purple blooms. My breath hitched. No card, no explanation, just the flowers, their petals unfurling in the cool morning light. A pang so sharp it stole my breath shot through me. I remembered, with an almost agonizing clarity, a childhood afternoon with Igor. We had been no older than 10, scrambling down a hidden, treacherous ravine just outside the dacha, our knees scraped, our faces streaked with dirt and sunshine. He'd discovered a secret patch of these exact irises, nestled among the rocks, blooming only in the twilight hours, almost black in certain lights. He'd sworn no one else knew of them, pressed one into my hand, telling me its deep, resilient purple matched my spirit. "Beautiful in the shadows," he'd said, his young eyes earnest and full of a devotion I'd taken for granted. No one else knew about my absurd, childish affection for them. No one. My heart, a fragile relic I thought long buried and incapable of feeling anything so potent, gave a terrified, exhilarating lurch. It couldn't be him. Could it? The flowers continued to appear, sometimes at the gallery, sometimes subtly placed on the grand piano in the drawing room when I returned home, almost as if someone had slipped Pather's ever-tightening security. Always the midnight irises, always anonymous. Each time they stirred a tumultuous mix of hope and dread within me. They were a message only I could decipher, a ghost from a past I had sworn to bury. My father, Arkady, raged about security breaches, about unknown rivals, about the audacity of whoever dared to trespass on his property. He dismissed the flowers as a mere psychological tactic, a minor annoyance, never once connecting them to Igor or to their shared history. He was too consumed by his own growing paranoia, too blind to the nuances of a game played with emotions, not just brute force. But I watched his face, saw the tremor in his hand, the way he barked orders at his men, his empire beginning to creak under an unseen pressure. The tension in the house grew almost unbearable. Then, there were the shadows. One evening, walking home, lost in the city's twilight haze, the familiar route felt strangely charged. A prickle on the back of my neck. I paused, pretending to admire a storefront display, my gaze subtly scanning the reflection. Nothing. But as I turned onto our street, a fleeting glimpse, a silhouette, tall, impossibly familiar in its broad-shouldered grace, melting into the deeper shadows of a distant alleyway. My breath hitched, a cold knot forming in my stomach. It couldn't be. It was just a trick of the city lights, a desperate wish manifesting from the depths of my loneliness, a cruel hallucination brought on by my unquenchable longing for the boy I'd lost. But the image lingered, a sharp imprint on my retina, refusing to fade. It happened again a week later. At a charity gala, a glittering, suffocating affair I attended out of obligation. I was mingling, forcing polite smiles, when a sudden shift in the room's energy drew my attention. I looked towards the main entrance, where a powerful presence seemed to draw every eye. He was already gone, but a lingering shadow, a sense of immense gravity, hung in the air. A broad back, a particular way of holding his head, the dark, almost predatory elegance of his form as he disappeared through a side exit. I strained my eyes, but he was truly gone. Was it just a coincidence? Was my mind playing tricks on me, desperate for any sign of him? Other things followed, subtle, unsettling details. A book, a rare first edition of a Russian poet Igor adored, Pushkin, if I remembered correctly, his favorite verses marked in faint pencil. It appeared anonymously on my desk at the gallery one morning, nestled amongst my usual papers. A particular brand of imported black tea, his favorite, the scent unmistakable, mysteriously appearing in our pantry, though no one else in the house drank it, certainly not my father, who preferred strong Turkish coffee. Each occurrence was a gentle, unnerving nudge, a signature. My father grew visibly agitated, his paranoia escalating into outright fear, but it was always directed at unknown enemies, at the shifting sands of the underworld, at the new breed of rivals he constantly railed against. He dismissed these occurrences, loudly, publicly, as minor annoyances, odd coincidences, the petty games of competitors. He spoke of the Rostislavs, of course, of Vladislav establishing their family's presence in the underworld, of Igor building his legitimate businesses, but always as a distant, abstract threat to his empire, never as a personal haunting of his daughter. He saw the external threat, the power plays, but he remained blind to the intimate, psychological warfare being waged through me. But I knew. A cold certainty, chilling and exhilarating, began to settle in my heart. The pieces, seemingly disparate, clicked into place with an unnerving precision. The irises, the shadows, the specific, intimate gifts, they were too personal, too pointed to be anyone else. He was back. Igor, the boy I loved. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't forgotten any of it. He was moving in the shadows, a specter from my past, systematically dismantling my father's world, and perhaps, finally, irrevocably, he was coming for me too. The thought was a dizzying, intoxicating mix of dread and desperate, illogical hope. The storm I had waited for was gathering, and its eye, I realized with a trembling heart, was fixed on me.
Chapter 5. The subtle game had begun weeks ago. It was a prelude, a psychological overture before the grand symphony of Arkady Borodin's ruin. My initial moves against his financial strongholds, while effective, were merely tremors. The real message, the one meant solely for her, required a more personal touch. I had instructed my people to start sending the flowers. Not grand, ostentatious bouquets, but small, precise arrangements of midnight irises, left anonymously at the Serpov gallery, or sometimes subtly placed on the grand piano in the drawing room of her dacha. I knew, from years of remembering every insignificant detail about her, that only she would understand their meaning. He had once found a secret patch of them, nestled in a hidden ravine, their velvety purple almost black in the twilight. He'd sworn no one else knew of them, pressed one into her hand, telling her it matched her spirit, resilient and beautiful in the shadows. It was a secret language, a dark signal, a declaration that I was back, and I was coming for them both. The acquisition of the Serpov gallery itself was the next, more overt phase, a surgical strike that bled Arkady where it hurt the most, his public image. The news had rippled through the city's richest families like a stone dropped in a stagnant pond, causing ripples of whispered scandal and speculation. They saw a shrewd business maneuver. I saw 1,000 tiny cuts, each one showing how he was losing control, a direct insult to the respectable front he worked so hard to keep up. It was a perfectly planned attack, managed by my money experts from the shadows, with Vladislav's quiet power behind it. It left Arkady scrambling, caught out in the open and weak. Tonight, though, was about showing everyone who was in charge. The grand reopening of the Serpov gallery under new ownership. My ownership. This was a carefully planned step, not just to make me look stronger in public, but to force Elara to be near me, to make her directly see her father's shame, and by extension, her own. The big hall buzzed with forced smiles and hidden judgments, the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the faint scent of fresh paint. Every shiny surface reflected the bright lights from above, and every talk was a careful dance of power and pretending. I moved through it all, feeling like a ghost at my own victory party, my senses extra sharp, waiting for her. My eyes, trained to find weakness and chances, saw her shape across the crowded room. She stood near a modern sculpture, her back to me. She was still slender, so familiar it hurt, wearing a simple, elegant dress that seemed to soak up the light instead of shining. A sharp, unexpected ache twisted inside my stomach. I crushed it down immediately. It was just an old memory, a pain like a missing limb for a past that was truly dead. The tattoo on my forearm, Elara's eyes, felt like it burned beneath the sleeve of my suit. It was a constant, fiery reminder of the pure, boundless love that had turned into this bitter need for revenge. Tonight, this tattoo would be a symbol of my hard will, not a sign of any affection. I started to walk towards her, my steps slow and sure, cutting a path through the meaningless chatter of the guests. Each step was a deliberate effort to rebuild the walls around my heart, to make the ice that had covered it for years even stronger. I forced myself to think only of my father, Sergei, his strong hands, his booming laugh, then the painful image of Arkady's betrayal, his face twisted in a cold, heartless decision. That was my fuel. That was my only goal. Elara was just the way I would deliver this pain. She turned slowly, as if she felt me coming, or maybe just a tiny, almost unnoticeable shift in the air around me. Her eyes, those same luminous pools I carried etched on my skin, met mine across the space between us. For a quick second I saw it, the shock, the knowing, and then, deep beneath it, a flicker of that desperate, illogical hope I had learned to hate. It was a reflection of the innocent girl, the one who believed in endless summers and secret patches of midnight irises. It was a weakness in her, and it made me want to exploit it even more. I reached her, stopping just close enough to make her tense up, but not so close that it felt personal. My gaze was freezing cold, steady. "Elara Ivanova," I said, my voice low, precise, stripping her name of any warmth, any shared past. Each word was like a sharp tool, slowly chipping away at her calm. "Or should I say, Miss Ivanova? I hope the change of ownership at Serpov Gallery has been easy for you." Her breath caught, a small gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes, wide and searching, darted over my face, begging for any sign of the boy she once knew. I gave her nothing. My face was a mask of polite indifference, carefully built over years of harsh training. Her father's betrayal was her burden, but her suffering would be entirely mine to create. "Igor," she whispered, her voice barely a sound, heavy with unspoken feelings, a stark contrast to my own steady tone. The sound of my name on her lips, soft and vulnerable, felt like a weapon aimed at me. It almost broke my hard front. I tightened my jaw, focusing on the burning sensation from the tattoo, on the cold fire it lit inside me. "It's Mr. Rostislav now, Miss Ivanova." I corrected her, my voice sharper, colder. I wanted to make sure she understood the formal, unbreakable distance between us. Our families, old agreements no longer matter. This is a new time, a new owner. My eyes flickered pointedly around the gallery, making it clear this was my territory now. "I promise you, I run my businesses with extreme care. There will be no room for old feelings." I watched as her face turned pale, the last small sparks of hope draining from her eyes, replaced by a painful understanding. This was the moment I had planned for, the moment she realized there was no turning back, no trace of the boy who had loved her. This was the perfect way to torment Arkady. But even as I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, a cold knot twisted deep in my gut. A quick flash of something I couldn't name, a ghost of regret. I brutally crushed it down. "I understand," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper, her eyes looking down, fixed on something beyond my shoulder. What will happen to the gallery, to my work?" "The gallery will do very well, Miss Ivanova," I stated, my tone unyielding, leaving no room for argument. "Under new leadership, of course, your past contributions will be noted. For now, you are simply an employee, like anyone else. You will follow new orders, or you will leave." Every word was designed to hurt, to make her feel small, to strip away her purpose and passion. I watched for the subtle flinch, the small tremor, the clear sign that she understood her powerlessness. She looked up then, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but a faint, brave spark flickered in their depths. "You've changed," she said, not as a question, but as a broken statement, a heartbroken observation. "Time changes everyone, Elara," I replied, deliberately using her first name, twisting the intimacy it once held into a cruel reminder. My gaze held hers, forcing her to truly see the cold, unyielding man I had become, the person she would now have to face, especially when one's family is completely destroyed by betrayal. The word hung heavy in the air, a poisoned barb aimed straight at her father, but meant for her to feel its full, crushing weight. "Don't confuse this polite talk for anything more than a business deal, Miss Ivanova, and don't mistake my lack of open anger for weakness. Your father will learn that there are fates far worse than death." A tense, forced laughter burst from a small group of art dealers nearby. Their eyes darted towards us, sensing the intense feelings in the air, but unable to understand what was truly happening. I gave them a short, businesslike nod, a signal that this private talk was now over. "I believe our conversation is finished," I said, my voice hardening, dismissive. "I have other guests who need my attention. Enjoy the evening, Miss Ivanova, or what's left of it." I turned, my back to her, leaving her standing alone amidst the glittering crowd, a fragile figure in a muted gown. The satisfaction was there, a grim victory that tasted like ash. But as I walked away towards the fake smiles and empty congratulations, a deep, unsettling chill settled over me. The tattoo burned, a constant, painful reminder of what I had done and what I had lost. I had inflicted pain, I had begun my revenge, but the cost, even to myself, felt heavy, surprisingly heavy. I pushed the feeling down. It was just the lingering ghost of old feelings, a dangerous weakness that had to be completely removed.
Chapter 6. The air in the Serpov Gallery, once a sanctuary of art and quiet contemplation, now felt like a suffocating cage. Igor's words, sharp and precise as daggers, still echoed in the grand hall, though only I seemed to hear them. It's Mr. Rostislav now, Miss Ivanova." Each syllable was a fresh wound, carving deeper than the last. He had stripped away my name, my identity, leaving me exposed and raw. The glittering crowd, oblivious to the emotional massacre that had just occurred, continued their polite chatter, their laughter a discordant symphony around my shattering world. My breath hitched, a small desperate gasp lost amidst the drone of their voices. My eyes, wide and searching, had pleaded with his, desperately begging for a flicker, a ghost of the boy I once knew. But he had given me nothing. His face, once so open and full of boyish mischief, was now a mask of polite indifference. Yet, even through the pain, I couldn't deny the striking change. He was breathtakingly handsome, a dangerous, sharpened beauty. His dark hair, meticulously styled, framed a jawline that was harder, more defined than I remembered. His shoulders, broader now, filled out his expensive suit with an intimidating grace. Every line of him spoke of power, of a ruthless strength that both terrified and captivated me. The Igor I knew was truly gone, replaced by this chilling, unyielding stranger who looked at me as if I were a mere piece of furniture, an inconvenient obstacle in his path. My father's betrayal was indeed my burden, but this suffering, this exquisite, deliberate torment, was entirely Igor's creation. I stood there, rooted to the spot, long after his back had turned, long after his imposing figure had melted into the throng of sycophantic faces. The words replayed in my mind, a relentless loop of agony. Employee. Follow new directives, or you will leave. He had taken the one thing that still gave my life purpose, the gallery I had poured my heart and soul into for years. It wasn't just a job, it was my sanctuary, my escape from the gilded prison of my home. Now even that was gone. A tremor started in my hands, then spread, a cold shiver racing down my spine despite the warmth of the room. My face, I knew, must be pale, devoid of all color, mirroring the lifelessness I felt inside. The last small sparks of hope, the foolish, persistent ember I had clung to for 5 agonizing years, had been brutally snuffed out by his cold indifference, replaced by a searing, painful understanding. There was no going back. The boy who loved me was dead, unequivocally. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Not in front of the people who would relish my weakness, who would report every tremor to my father, or worse, to Igor himself. But deep within those burning depths, a faint, defiant spark still flickered, a stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished. He had changed, yes. He was cruel, ruthless, filled with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. But for a fleeting moment, when he had used my name, when his eyes had locked on mine, I thought I saw something. A flicker of internal struggle, a shadow of pain beneath the mask of indifference. Was it just wishful thinking? A desperate illusion, conjured by a heart that refused to let go? Or was there, buried beneath layers of vengeance, still a tiny piece of the boy I remembered? And God, how I missed him. I missed the way his hand felt in mine, the way his laughter used to make my stomach flutter, the simple, effortless comfort of his presence. Seeing him now, even as he twisted the knife, made the absence of the old Igor a physical ache, a deep, hollow yearning for what we had lost. I walked, a zombie moving through a dream, towards the nearest quiet corner, seeking refuge behind a large, abstract canvas. My hands, still trembling, came up to cover my mouth, stifling a sob that clawed at my throat. The scent of midnight irises, so potent earlier, now felt like a cruel joke, a mockery of the intimacy it once symbolized. He had sent them. He had watched me. He had orchestrated this entire elaborate torment. It was precisely his way of communicating that he was back, that he was present. The weight of it all settled upon me, a suffocating blanket of despair. The knowledge that he hated me, that he truly hated me, was unbearable. It confirmed every insecurity, every whispered doubt about my own worth. I was Arkady Borodin's daughter, an extension of his crime. I deserved this. But even as I tried to accept this cold truth, my heart screamed in protest. How could the boy who once swore to protect me, who tattooed my eyes on his arm as a symbol of eternal love, now look at me with such chilling disdain? How could I miss him so desperately when he stood right before me, a beautiful, terrifying stranger? The noise of the gala intensified, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversations, the faint strains of classical music filtering through the air. Each sound was a painful intrusion into my private agony. I felt utterly alone, isolated in a crowd of hundreds. My father, who should have protected me, had brought this upon us. His actions had poisoned my past, ruined my present, and now obliterated any hope for a future. The resentment towards him, simmering beneath my love for Igor, now began to burn with a slow, steady intensity. He was so consumed by his own survival, his own power, that he had become blind to the true cost of his ambition. My love for Igor, battered and bruised, refused to die. It was a stubborn, illogical force, clinging to the phantom warmth of his past touch, the echo of his forgotten laughter.
Chapter 7. The echo of Elara's shattered silence from the gallery still resonated in my mind, a subtle hum beneath the triumphant thrum of my recent victory. Serpov Gallery was mine. Arkady Borodin's prized possession, his symbol of legitimacy, now lay firmly within my grasp. The city buzzed with the news of his financial weakening, the whispers of his crumbling empire. Yet, standing alone in my command center, surrounded by the glowing screens that charted his demise, the satisfaction felt hollow, incomplete. It was a good start, yes, but not the end. Not the true, soul-deep retribution I craved. It was a public humiliation, a dismantling of his power, but it wasn't the agonizing, personal torment that my father had endured. My father's pain wasn't just about lost territory or money. It was about a friendship betrayed, a trust shattered by the man he considered family, a man who had been his closest confidant since their high school days. To truly make Arkady pay, I needed to inflict a wound that mirrored his own treachery, a wound that festered not just in his coffers but in his very soul. And Elara, his daughter, his only true weakness, was the key. My gaze drifted to the tattoo on my forearm, Elara's eyes still burning with that fierce contradictory heat. My next move, the decisive one, was to make her mine. Not through affection, but through calculated possession, to bind her to me. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. The idea had been a quiet ember simmering beneath the surface of my vengeance for years. Our families, in the old days, had discussed a formal betrothal between us. We were teenagers then, Elara and I, the pact a distant hum of adult ambition. My father, in his earnest desire for lasting peace and unity between our houses, had genuinely believed in it. Arkady, ever the opportunist, saw the benefit of consolidating power, and now I would claim that forgotten vow. I walked to the large whiteboard where I usually diagrammed complex financial takeovers. Vladislav, I called, a hint of steel in my voice that conveyed the gravity of my thoughts. My brother emerged from the control room, his presence immediately grounding. He'd seen the cold, strategic side of me, respected it. Turning to face him fully, I said, "Now for the next phase. I'm going to marry Elara." Vladislav's stoic face didn't flinch. "You mean to claim her by the old betrothal?" Vladislav asked, his voice low, a ripple of understanding now in his tone. He wasn't questioning the why, but the how. He knew the rules, the history. A calculated move, brother. It will destabilize him further. Precisely, I conceded, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper, ensuring only he heard the true venom in my words. If he resists, I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, I will expose the deepest, dirtiest secrets of his remaining empire. Secrets that will see him not just stripped bare, but utterly destroyed by others. Secrets that will make his current troubles look like a picnic. "It will be a complicated move, politically," he finally said, his voice measured, "but it will achieve your aim, and mine." He understood the larger game. "It will achieve ultimate victory," I stated, my tone brooking no argument. Vladislav nodded slowly, a grim acceptance settling over his features. "Can you get your men to arrange a meeting with Borodin?" I said, my gaze drifting back to the city, to the invisible threads of power I was weaving. Chapter 8. The air in Arkady Borodin's private study was thick with the scent of old leather, stale cigar smoke, and a desperate, clinging fear. It was a smell I knew well, a scent that now defined his world. My men, a silent, disciplined unit chosen by Vladislav for their unwavering loyalty, had swept the room, ensuring no hidden microphones, no unexpected surprises. Arkady's own guards, beefy, tense figures, stood rigid against the walls, their hands hovering near their weapons, their eyes darting between my presence and the grim faces of my own security detail. The tension was a living thing, a coiled serpent ready to strike. And then he walked in, Arkady Borodin. My entire body tensed, an involuntary primal surge of pure, unadulterated hatred that clawed at my throat. my hands hidden in my pockets, clenched into fists, knuckles white. Every fiber of my being screamed for release, for the simple, brutal satisfaction of ending him right here, right now. I saw the tremor in his hands as he walked, the slight sag in his shoulders that hadn't been there 5 years ago. He was aging, a shadow of the formidable man who had once stood toe-to-toe with my father. But the rage, the burning desire for his death, was undimmed. I could almost feel the weight of Sergei's ghost beside me, urging me on. He sat across from me at the massive, ornate desk that had once been a symbol of his unchallenged authority, now a table for his undoing. His eyes, dark and wary, met mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the old Arkady, the man who had once laughed with my father, shared secrets, built dreams. Then, the mask snapped back into place. Defiance, veiled desperation. He was still trying to project strength, a futile effort. "Rostislav," he said, his voice a low growl laced with thinly veiled contempt. "To what do I owe this intrusion?" I leaned forward, my elbows on the polished desk, my gaze unwavering, cold as the Siberian winter. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Borodin. You know why I'm here. Your empire is bleeding, your reputation is in tatters, and your precious Serpov gallery is mine." I paused, letting that sink in, letting the full weight of his recent losses press down on him. But that was merely the overture. The true price is yet to be paid. His jaw tightened. "You think you can break me with a few corporate maneuvers, boy? My roots run deeper than your father's ever did." "Your roots are rotten, Arkady," I countered, my voice dangerously calm. "And I have a gardener's precise hand. We've spoken of leverage before. You've kept secrets, haven't you? Hidden accounts in offshore banks, illicit dealings with the Chechen syndicates that would turn your Russian allies against you overnight, the falsified documents for the Serpov land deal, the backdoor payments to city officials. I have it all. Dates, names, bank codes, details that would not only send you to prison for the rest of your miserable life, but would make sure your remaining rivals carve up your family and leave them nothing. You would be utterly exposed, a public disgrace." His face went ashen, the defiance drained from his eyes, replaced by a raw, naked terror. This was the fear I craved, the fear that mirrored my father's final realization of betrayal. This was the true impact of my revenge. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew the depths of my intelligence. "What do you?" he rasped, barely breathing the words. I gave him a slow, razor-thin smile. "Justice, and the fulfillment of an old promise. Your family once pledged Elara to mine. I'm here to collect what's mine." His face contorted with disbelief, then horror. You want to marry Elara? She is mine to protect now," I said coldly. "I won't betray her like you betrayed my father. She will be safe, provided for. That's more than you ever offered anyone." "No," he growled louder now. "No, I won't let you drag her into this. You want me? Fine. Take everything, but leave her out of it." I didn't flinch. "She is the point, Arkady. You took my father from me. I'll take your daughter, one who was promised to me from start." He slammed his fist on the table, eyes burning. "I said no." "And I said it's not your decision anymore," I snapped, stepping closer, voice low and lethal. "Say no, and your world collapses tonight. Your name will be erased from every deal, every project. The gallery, gone. The assets, frozen. Your partner's gone. You'll be left to rot, and Elara will still end up in my world. But this way, at least, she keeps her name. Her safety." He stared at me, trembling, shattered. Silence stretched until it turned to surrender. Then finally, through clenched teeth, he muttered, "I'll arrange the wedding." That's when I let the blade twist. "There won't be a wedding," I said, voice flat. "No ceremony, no vows, no dress, just a paper, signed, stamped, filed." He said nothing, just stared at me. Not a word, not a curse, not even the defiant shake of his head. But I saw it, the way his mouth tensed, the way his fingers curled just slightly. He didn't need to speak. I knew what was running through his mind. He was remembering her voice, telling him how she wanted her wedding to be something beautiful, a veil she'd once described in detail, the colors, the flowers, the kind of music that would play when she walked in. I remembered it too. And this silence I gave her instead was my answer. There would be no ceremony, no celebration, no white dress, just a cold signature on paper, a transaction, a reclamation. She would be mine, not as a partner, not as a lover, as debt collected. He still didn't speak, he didn't argue, he didn't beg. just sat there, slowly breaking in the silence. And after a long pause, he finally managed one line, low, rough, barely above a whisper. "Don't hurt her." I didn't turn back fully, just enough for him to hear the final blow. "I won't," I said. "I won't touch her. I won't speak harshly. I won't even have time for her." My voice was cold steel. "She's not the point, Arkady. She's the price." He didn't respond. He couldn't. And I didn't need him to. The tattoo on my forearm, her eyes, burned against my skin. Once, they meant love. Then revenge. Now, they were a seal, a brand, a victory. Mine.
Chapter 9. The news came not as a gentle suggestion, but as a blunt instrument, a sudden, brutal blow that shattered the fragile peace I had managed to construct around myself. It was my father, Arkady, who delivered the verdict. He stood before me, his face a grim mask, stripped of its usual cunning, replaced by a defeated emptiness I had never seen before. He paced his study, a once magnificent caged tiger, now truly stripped of its roar. His movements were agitated, a constant tremor in his hands. "Elara," he began, his voice rough, barely meeting my gaze, "you are to be married to Igor Rostislav." My heart, a treacherous, foolish thing, leaped before my mind could even process the dread. Married to Igor? After all these agonizing years of silence, of his cold indifference, of my desperate, unanswered pleas? My breath left my lungs in a silent whoosh, leaving me lightheaded. I wanted to demand answers, to scream, to ask why, but the words died in my throat. My father offered no explanation, no grand pronouncements of alliance or stability, just the stark command. My mind screamed against it, a desperate, illogical protest, but my heart, that stubborn, defiant organ, clung to the impossible. Igor. His name echoed in the hollow space inside me, a name I had loved, still loved, with every fiber of my being. I hadn't exchanged more than a few formal words with my father in years, a chasm of unspoken resentments and fears dividing us. He was a ruthless man, a monster in the eyes of many, including, increasingly, in my own. He had brought this catastrophe upon us. Yet in that moment, as he delivered the news, I saw a flicker. A brief, profound shadow of shame, and perhaps even grief in his eyes. He had lost something, too. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that despite all his monstrous flaws, despite the horrifying things he had done, he still cared for me. I was his daughter, his only child, and his last true weakness. And now he was surrendering me. The days that followed were a blur, but not the kind softened by joy or wrapped in anticipation. They were sharp-edged, clinical, and cold. There were no invitations, no whispered excitement between friends, no gentle fittings for a flowing white gown. That absence hurt more than anything else. It wasn't just a detail, it was everything. The dream I had once held close, fragile and shimmering, had been shattered before it could even breathe. I had told him once, Igor, back when he was still mine, back when his smile still meant something soft. I'd described the veil I wanted, lace and pearl, the kind that caught the light just enough to feel like magic. I told him I wanted music, real music, a quartet maybe, and a dress that would make me feel like I belonged in a storybook. He had smiled then, brushed a strand of hair from my face and said I deserved all of it. And now I flipped through pages and pages of legal documents, dry, lifeless things with no vows, no promises, only terms, only obligations. There were no church bells, no laughter, no flowers, just lawyers, gaunt, humorless men with tight smiles and tighter suits. They handled everything. I didn't even see him. Not once. It was always his representatives, his men, sharp-eyed, efficient, and utterly devoid of warmth. They spoke in facts and conditions, not emotions. I was no bride to them, just a formality to be processed, a box to be checked off. And I signed, because there was no point in fighting something already decided. Each night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, the gold trim mocking me. I tried to remember what it felt like to be loved by him, really loved, not owned, not claimed, just loved. The memory of his eyes, how they once softened when they met mine, played on a loop behind my eyelids. I wondered if that boy was gone entirely, if this cold silence was all that remained. Maybe in some broken, bitter way, this was his way of keeping me close, of fulfilling that old promise in the only way he could now. Maybe he thought this was protection. Maybe. It was a delusion, I knew that. A pathetic, shrinking thread of hope I clung to because there was nothing else left. But it was mine, and I had nothing else. The day itself arrived with a grim, overcast sky, perfectly matching the desolation in my soul. There was no grand church, no hushed cathedral filled with flowers and sunlight, no joyful procession down a long aisle. The ceremony was held in my father's private study, the same room where I had last heard Igor's chilling demands, the very space where my fate had been sealed. It felt less like a wedding and more like a funeral, a solemn, joyless affair. Only a handful of silent witnesses were present. My father, his face drawn and utterly defeated. Vladislav Rostislav, Igor's older brother, a silent, imposing shadow, his heavily tattooed arms crossed over his chest, his eyes, so like Igor's, holding an unreadable, intense gaze, and a solemn-faced official who read the vows in a monotone voice, his words flat and devoid of meaning. I wore a simple dark dress, chosen not by me, but by one of Igor's stony-faced assistants. It was elegant, expensive, but it felt less like a bridal gown and more like a shroud. My hands trembled visibly as I approached the massive desk, the same one where my father had sat in defeated silence. Igor was already there. He stood, not in celebratory finery, but in a simple, perfectly tailored dark shirt and equally dark trousers. Even dressed so plainly, he was breathtakingly handsome. His dark hair, sharp and immaculate, framed a jawline that was harder, more defined than I remembered. Every line of him spoke of power, of a dangerous, ruthless strength that both terrified and captivated me. He looked ready. Ready to be done. As I took my place across from him, my gaze was drawn inexplicably to his forearm. There it was, the tattoo. The eyes. My eyes. Back then it had been his only one, a singular, hidden symbol of his tender, fierce love. Now it was surrounded. Skulls, their empty sockets mocking the life within me, intertwined, thorny roses, their beauty sharp, dangerous. Tribal patterns, dark and complex, speaking of a brutal history. The eyes were still there, undeniable, but now they were just one piece of a much larger, darker narrative. He barely looked at me. His gaze was fixed on the papers before him, his expression one of absolute preoccupation, as if this whole charade was an irritating necessary formality he wished to dispense with. He didn't offer a smile, not even a forced one for appearances. There was no warmth as our fingers brushed while reaching for the pen, no exchange of rings, no kiss, just the cold finality of signatures. My name Elara Ivanova, becoming Elara Rostislav, irrevocably. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. It was brutal in its efficiency, stripping away every ounce of romantic illusion I had desperately clung to. I was married to Igor. The boy I had loved, the man who now clearly despised me, had claimed me as his property. The silence that followed felt louder than any shouted curse. My father, looking older than his years, merely nodded to Igor, a gesture of grim submission, then averted his gaze, unable to meet my eyes. Vladislav, still silent, watched us both with an almost clinical detachment. After the signing, Igor gathered his papers with a decisive snap. He didn't look at me again. He simply turned to one of his men, a hulking guard near the door. "My driver will take Elara home," he stated, his voice flat, dismissive. Then, without another word, without a backward glance, he addressed his brother. "Vladislav, I have business to handle." And then he walked out. Just like that, leaving me standing there, a wife he had claimed but clearly had no interest in. I felt a chill spread through me, colder than any Siberian winter. The wedding of my dreams had become the marriage of my nightmares. Chapter 10. The driver was a silent, hulking figure, his presence as unyielding as the silence in the luxurious sedan. The ride back to the dacha felt interminable, each kilometer stretching into an eternity of quiet despair. Igor's dismissive command, "My driver will take Elara home," echoed in my ears, a final brutal punctuation mark on the farce of our wedding. I was his wife, a title that felt like a brand of ownership, yet he had left me unceremoniously for business to handle. The bitter irony of it all was a constant throb behind my eyes. The servants moved like shadows, their faces carefully blank, avoiding my gaze as I walked through the cavernous entrance hall. My bag, packed earlier by an assistant, had already been taken to my new room. My new room. The new room, though still lavish, felt impersonal, temporary. It had a strange, almost unused quality about it, lacking the deep, masculine scent of a room regularly occupied by its master. I had tried to dismiss it, to tell myself it was simply part of the transition, a reorganization after such a sudden, monumental change. But a small, persistent voice in my mind had whispered, "This isn't his room. This isn't where he sleeps." And now a chilling certainty began to settle. I changed into a simple silk nightgown, its softness a cruel contrast to the jagged edges of my emotions. The bathroom felt too vast, the mirrors reflecting a stranger with haunted eyes. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to erase the ghost of his indifference, but it clung to me like a shroud. This was my first night as his wife. Foolishly, childishly, a tiny, buried part of me had harbored a desperate, pathetic hope. Perhaps, once the public display was over, once the business was done, he would come. Perhaps he would look at me, truly look at me, and find something of the girl he once adored. Perhaps the tenderness he had shown as a boy, the love that had been the very air I breathed, wasn't entirely dead. Perhaps he would try, however awkwardly, to bridge the chasm. This was the last thing I had hoped to find, an empty room, a cold bed, and the echo of his dismissal. The silence of the house was oppressive, broken only by the distant tick of a grandfather clock. I lay in the vast bed, a queen in a kingdom of ice, listening. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified, distorting into phantom footsteps, phantom whispers. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, but laughter. Light, feminine laughter, followed by a deeper, masculine chuckle that sent a shiver down my spine. Igor's laugh. Not the cold, clipped sound he had used with me, but a warmer, more genuine resonance. It was late, past midnight. He was home, and he was not alone. The sounds grew closer, echoing from the main wing of the house, drawing a cold line between where I lay and where he was. The laughter became clearer, interspersed with hushed murmurs, the unmistakable sounds of intimate conversation. My breath hitched, a fresh wave of despair washing over me. He had brought someone home, on our wedding night. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold marble floor. I didn't know why I was moving, driven by some morbid curiosity, some desperate need for proof. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the polished wood. The voices were closer now, just outside what I knew was his master suite, the grand, opulent bedroom that surely belonged to the master of the house, the one I had intuitively known was not mine. "And you, my strong bear," a woman's voice purred, playful, husky with amusement. Such a serious face. Did the little business meeting not go well? Then Igor's voice, startlingly close, intimate, a low rumble that resonated through the door. "It went precisely as planned, Malaya," he murmured, his tone soft, affectionate. My blood ran cold. Malaya, sweetheart. He had never spoken to me with such tenderness. A short, sharp giggle. And who was that sad little bird in the dark dress at the gallery? She looked ready to weep. My breath hitched. The question hung in the air, a cruel, mocking taunt. My eyes burned, tears threatening to spill. "Please, Igor, please don't." His voice came, colder now, dismissive, yet utterly casual. "Don't worry about her, Anya. She is no one. No one." The words sliced through me, 1,000 blades twisting in my gut. No one. After everything, after the years of silence, the desperate hope, the torturous proposal, the mockery of a wedding, I was no one. The tattoo on his arm, my eyes mocked me from across the vast emotional distance. Then, a sickening wet sound. A kiss. Long, lingering, audible, and the woman's satisfied sigh. My imagination, vivid and cruel, filled in the gaps. His lips on hers, the same lips that had once kissed my childhood scrapes better, that had whispered promises of eternity. "Come, Malaya." Igor's voice, slightly muffled now, closer, deeper. "Let me show you how well the business truly went." I heard the creak of the master bedroom door, the soft click as it closed, and then silence. A deafening, echoing silence that screamed louder than any physical blow. I stumbled back from the door, my legs weak, my hands flying to my mouth to stifle the raw, animalistic cry that clawed its way up my throat. The confirmation hit me with brutal force. The separate bedroom, the cold distance, it all made horrifying, sickening sense now. I was not his wife in any meaningful sense of the word. I was a trophy, a pawn, a living, breathing instrument of his revenge. My purpose was to suffer, to be humiliated, to be publicly disregarded, all for my father to witness. My stomach heaved, a sudden, violent spasm. I barely made it to the adjoining bathroom, collapsing to my knees beside the ornate toilet. The retching was painful, agonizing, expelling the last remnants of my meager dinner, but also, it felt like, the last vestiges of my hope, my dignity, my shattered dreams. The sounds from his bedroom started then, faint at first, then growing clearer, cutting through the thick walls. Hushed moans, giggle, his low, pleased murmur, and then, increasingly, the unmistakable, wrenching screams of pleasure. Hers, his, a symphony of my own personal damnation. I covered my ears, pressing my palms against them until my temples ached, desperate to block out the torment. But the sounds penetrated, burrowing into my mind, mingling with the bitter taste of bile in my mouth, the burning shame in my eyes. I curled into a tight ball on the cold bathroom floor, rocking back and forth, the silk nightgown clinging to my sweat-damp skin. Tears streamed down my face, hot and endless, carving paths of despair. I cried for the innocent girl, for the boy she had lost, for the love that had been twisted in this grotesque weapon. I cried until my throat was raw, until my body was spent, until the screams of pleasure from the other side of the wall faded into the merciful darkness of exhaustion.
Chapter 11. The drive back to the dacha felt like a victory lap, yet the triumph tasted like ash. The wedding, that cold, formal exchange of signatures, was done. Elara was mine. The memory of her wide, haunted eyes, pleading for a kindness I was determined to deny her, was a bitter triumph. My mind, usually a fortress of cold logic, was a tempest of conflicting emotions, a swirling vortex of hatred, a grim satisfaction, and a deep, buried unease. Anya, my chosen instrument for tonight's torment, sat beside me in the back of the sleek black car. She was a beautiful distraction, her laughter light, her touch uncomplicated. Her presence was a deliberate act, one calculated to sting, to humiliate. I knew Elara would be in her bedroom. I knew she would be listening. And that thought, that image of her alone in a room she instinctively knew wasn't truly hers, was the true objective of this night. The dacha loomed, a grand, imposing silhouette against the moonless sky. Its gates swung open silently, welcoming us into the heart of what was now, by technicality, my home. Anya's hand slid onto my thigh, her fingers trailing playfully, my gaze already sweeping the darkened windows of the dacha, imagining Elara behind one of them, listening, waiting. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind, every hushed servant's step would now be amplified for her. It was a perfect stage for my next act of cruelty. We stepped into the cavernous entrance hall, our footsteps echoing on the polished marble. Anya's laughter, light and clear, bounced off the high ceilings, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that usually reigned here. I steered her towards the grand staircase, my steps deliberate, loud, ensuring our presence was unmistakable. I knew exactly where Elara's new bedroom was, the smaller, more isolated suite on the west wing, far from the master's chambers. The distance wasn't great enough to truly mute the sounds I intended for her to hear. Anya, clinging to my arm, her presence deliberately demonstrative, prattled on about the gala earlier, oblivious to the silent drama I was orchestrating. My mind was already picturing Elara, alone in that room, listening to our every move, every laugh. The thought ignited a cold, grim satisfaction. We ascended the staircase, the sound of our footsteps heavy and purposeful. At the top I paused briefly, casting a glance down the corridor leading to the west wing, though I saw no movement. I didn't need to. I could feel her presence, a tightening in the air, a hushed stillness emanating from that direction. She was there. She was listening. "Come, Malaya," I murmured against Anya's hair, my voice a low rumble, meant only for her, and more importantly, for the woman listening in the quiet room across the wing. "Let me show you how well the business truly went." I scooped Anya into my arms, feeling her light, eager weight. She giggled, burying her face in my neck as I strode towards the master bedroom, the grand, opulent suite that Elara would instinctively know was mine. I didn't see her reaction as I entered, didn't see her pain as the door closed, sealing us within, leaving her alone in the cold, echoing dacha on her wedding night. I just knew she was there, and she was listening. The morning light, stark and unforgiving, filtered through the heavy curtains. Anya stirred beside me, her hand reaching for my chest. The act was over. The perverse satisfaction had faded, leaving behind only the bitter taste of ash. I felt nothing but a profound emptiness. "Get dressed," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth from the night. She propped herself up on an elbow, her eyes still sleepy. "What, so soon, Malaya?" I thought. "You thought wrong," I cut her off, my tone sharp, final. I got out of bed, pulling on a silk robe. "I'm done. You can leave now. My driver will take you wherever you need to go." Her eyes widened, hurt flashing in their depths. Done? Igor, what are you talking about? It was what it was, I said, turning to face her, my gaze cold and unyielding. A temporary arrangement. It's over. Don't contact me again. Her protests, her attempts to plead, were met with an impenetrable wall of indifference. She was dismissed. Another means to an end, used and discarded. I went down to the breakfast room expecting to see her. Elara, a small, twisted part of me almost wanted to witness the wreckage of her first night as my wife. The table was set for one. No trace of her. Just the cold, formal setting. A faint ripple of something unfamiliar, unsettling, stirred in my chest. Had she gone out? Unlikely. I called the head guard at the door, his stern face appearing on the intercom screen. Has Miss Ivanova left the premises this morning? No, Mr. Rostislav, he replied, his voice firm. We have not seen her exit the main gates or any secondary entrances. She is still within the dasha. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. Not the triumphant cold of vengeance, but something else entirely. I walked towards the wing where her room was, the silence of the house pressing down on me. The door to her suite was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the opulent bedroom stretching before me, vast and empty. The bed was neatly made, untouched. Had she not slept there? My eyes scanned the room, searching. Then I saw it. A sliver of dark fabric, a pale foot, partially visible near the bathroom door, just beyond the ornate wooden frame. My heart stopped. Literally. The world narrowed to that single, terrifying image. My breath caught in my throat, a suffocating knot. No. I ran. Not walked. Ran. The silence of the house suddenly felt alive with my pounding footsteps, with the frantic beat of my own heart. I burst into the bathroom, my gaze fixed on the motionless figure curled on the cold marble floor. Elara. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her skin clammy. My mind, usually so sharp, so calculating, refused to process. Had she, then, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, the slight rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, a fragile, precious breath. The relief that flooded me was so intense, so unexpected, it almost buckled my knees. My body sagged against the doorframe, a shaky, silent exhalation escaping my lips. I knelt beside her, my hands, usually so steady, trembling as I reached for her. Her skin was feverish, burning beneath my touch. I scooped her up, her body light and alarmingly still in my arms. The silk of her nightgown clung to her, damp with sweat. I carried her out of the cold bathroom, through the empty bedroom, and gently laid her on the vast, unused bed. The bed I had assigned her, the bed she hadn't touched. Elara, I murmured, my voice rough, shaking her shoulder gently. Elara, wake up! Her eyes fluttered open slowly, a gradual, agonizing reveal. Those large, luminous eyes, the ones etched into my arm, the ones I had looked into just last night. Now they were different, dull, listless, dead. The vibrancy, the life, the desperate hope I had so brutally crushed. It was all gone, replaced by an unsettling void. She said not a word. Her gaze passed over me without recognition, without emotion. Just a blank, empty stare. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? To break her, to strip her bare, just as Arkady had stripped my father, to watch her despair. This vacant stare, this silent surrender, was the ultimate proof of my success. Yet a part of me, a deep, unexpected part, twisted with a sharp, unwelcome hurt. It was a jarring contradiction. This emptiness in her eyes felt wrong, too final. I shook my head, dismissing the fleeting weakness. This was the vengeance. This was the cost of betrayal. You have a fever, I stated, my voice regaining its cold, detached tone, forcing the unwanted emotion back down. I'll send someone with medicine and food. She tried to protest, a faint, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a weak murmur I couldn't quite decipher. I ignored her, turning away from the bed. My mission was accomplished. Her father would know. He would feel this. A servant will be here shortly with what you need, I repeated, my voice firm, already walking towards the door. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't look back. I had to leave. I had business to handle. The empire of Arkady Borodin wouldn't dismantle itself. I strode out of the room, pulled the door shut behind me, and walked down the silent corridor. My mind demanded I go to the office, to immerse myself in the cold logic of numbers and power, to shake off the unsettling sight of her vacant eyes. But my feet faltered. I didn't go to the office. I didn't re-enter her room. I found myself in my own study, pacing restlessly, staring out at the city, the cold comfort of the high-rise office no longer appealing. I didn't know why, but I stayed home. I stayed.
Chapter 12. Waking was a slow, agonizing climb back to reality, each breath a conscious effort. My head throbbed with a dull, insistent ache, and every muscle in my body felt heavy, bruised. Confusion, a fleeting, momentary respite from the pain, flickered through me. Before I could fully process the thought, a shadow moved over me, a large, imposing presence that suddenly loomed over the bed. Igor. My breath hitched, a sharp, involuntary intake of air. The sight of him, so close, sent a jolt through my battered body. His face was a blurred concern, his hand briefly on my forehead. As his features sharpened in my vision, the memories of the previous night crashed over me with brutal force, a relentless, horrifying tidal wave. The cold, sterile wedding ceremony, his icy, dismissive words. The feeling of being abandoned at the dacha, a trophy he had claimed but seemingly forgotten. Then the laughter. Light, feminine laughter, followed by his deeper, masculine chuckle echoing from the main wing. The purring voice of a woman, husky with playful intimacy, his low, affectionate murmur. And then, the unmistakable wrenching screams of pleasure that had pierced the walls, burrowing into my mind, mingling with the bitter taste of bile in my mouth, the burning shame in my eyes. No one, his words, searing and absolute, branded themselves onto my soul. I was no one, a commodity, a trophy, a tool for his revenge. My wedding night, the night I had foolishly harbored a sliver of hope, had been a public execution of my last remaining dreams. He spoke now, his voice rough, detached, cutting through the agony of my flashback. Words about a fever, about sending someone for medicine and food. My mind, sluggish and clouded by illness, registered only fragments. I tried to protest, a weak shake of my head, a desperate murmur that my parched throat wouldn't allow to form into coherent words. I didn't want his mercy. I didn't want his forced concern. I just wanted to disappear. He ignored me, turning away, his footsteps receding. As the sound of his receding footsteps faded completely and the door firmly closed behind him, a single tear, hot and heavy, finally escaped the corner of my eye. It traced a slow, lonely path down my temple, a final surrender. The boy I loved so dearly was truly gone, replaced by a stranger who wore his face, his eyes, and wielded his contempt like a weapon. The pain of that realization, deeper than any physical ache, consumed me. The fever settled in, a dull, aching heat that consumed my body, mirroring the slow burn in my soul. I felt detached, floating above myself, watching my own anguish with a strange, cold distance. The soft footsteps of a maid eventually broke the oppressive silence. She brought a tray with broth and medicine, her face carefully blank, her eyes avoiding mine. She spoke in hushed, polite tones, offering remedies, but her words were just noise. I couldn't bring myself to eat. The thought of food, the very act of nourishment, was repulsive. My stomach still churned with the memory of the night, the bile, the shame. I took the medicine mechanically, a silent protest against my own body's weakness, against its refusal to simply give up. There was no crying left, no tears to shed, only the vast, cold emptiness. I lay there, motionless, my gaze fixed on nothing, my mind drifting into a hazy, feverish void. This was my life now, a prisoner of love owned by hate, utterly broken by the cruelty of the man I still, foolishly, irrationally, loved. The breaking point had been reached, and beyond it there was nothing but a desolate, unending silence.
Chapter 13. The city lights outside my study window blurred into streaks of gold and crimson as night fell. Hours had passed since I left Elara's room. Hours spent trying to immerse myself in the cold logic of numbers, in the intricate web of Arkady's crumbling empire. Yet the usual sharpness of my mind felt dulled, unfocused. The satisfaction I had anticipated, the grim pleasure of watching his world unravel, seemed strangely muted. Every report from Vladislav's men, every success in crippling Borodin's assets felt hollow. Instead, a persistent image clung to me, Elara's eyes, dull, listless, dead. The scotch in my glass remained untouched. The reports on my desk, usually devoured with ruthless efficiency, lay unread. My gaze kept drifting towards the west wing, towards her room. It was absurd. I had orchestrated this. I had wielded her as a weapon. Her suffering was a means to an end, a reflection of Arkady's betrayal. Yet, the cold comfort of my office, the strategic distance I usually maintained, felt insufficient. A foreign and unsettling need began to gnaw at me. A need to verify, to see the extent of the damage, to reassure myself that my meticulously planned torment was proceeding as expected. I paced the study, the Persian rug muffling my footsteps, but doing nothing to quiet the insistent whispers in my mind. Vladislav would call this weakness, a lapse in control, and he would be right. I was supposed to be detached, ruthless. But the image of her pale face, curled on the cold bathroom floor, lingered, a stark counterpoint to the triumphant vision of my revenge N. The corridor leading to the west wing was steeped in a heavy silence, broken only by the distant hum of the dacha's ancient heating system. Each step felt strangely heavy, loaded with an unspoken tension. I pushed the door open slowly, the heavy wood creaking faintly on its hinges. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. It was vast, opulent, yet utterly impersonal, just as I had intended when I chose it for her. And then I saw the tray. On the small, polished table beside the bed, exactly where the maid would have left it that morning, sat the breakfast untouched. The broth, now congealed and cold, the pastries, shriveled and unappealing. She hadn't eaten. A sharp pang entirely unwelcome jabbed at my chest. My eyes swept to the nightstand. The small, crystal glass that had held her medicine was empty. She had taken that, at least. A faint, irrational relief washed over me. She hadn't completely given up. Not yet. My gaze finally settled on her. She was lying in the middle of the immense bed, a small, fragile figure swallowed by the vastness of the blankets. Her hair, dark and disheveled, fanned out against the pristine white pillow. Her skin was still impossibly pale, almost translucent in the dim light, a stark contrast to the deep, muted colors of her nightgown. Even from across the room, I could see the faint flush of fever on her cheekbones, the way her lips were slightly parted, her breathing shallow. She looked diminished, broken, and utterly vulnerable. This was what I wanted. This was the vengeance. This was Arkady's mirror. Yet looking at her, a different kind of anger flared within me. Not the cold, calculated fury of revenge, but a raw, frustrated impatience. She was supposed to suffer, yes, but not like this. Not with illness, which felt too passive, too helpless. She was supposed to endure my cruelty, not succumb to a mere fever. This was untidy, unpredictable. And that, more than anything, grated against my meticulous control. I walked closer to the bed, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I stood over her, gazing down at her still form. The urge to reach out, to check her temperature, to pull the blanket higher, was a startling, unwelcome instinct. I suppressed it, my hands clenching at my sides. "Wake up, Elara," I commanded, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the haze of sleep. Her eyes fluttered, then slowly opened. "You haven't eaten," I stated, my voice regaining its cold, detached tone, forcing the unwanted emotion back down. "This is unacceptable." I turned, walking swiftly to the door. "Send the head cook to me," I barked at a passing servant in the corridor, my voice sharp enough to make him jump, "and tell him to prepare something light, broth, something she will actually consume." I re-entered her room, my gaze still fixed on her. The head cook, a portly man with flour on his apron, arrived few minutes later, carrying a fresh tray of steaming, aromatic chicken broth, soft bread, and fresh juice. He glanced nervously between Elara's still form and my unyielding face. "Leave it," I instructed, my gaze still on Elara. The cook placed the tray on the nightstand and hurried out. I picked up the bowl of broth, its warmth a stark contrast to the coldness of the room of Elara. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking slightly under my weight. "You will eat this, Elara," I stated, my voice firm, allowing no room for argument. I spooned a small amount of broth and brought it to her lips. She turned her head away, a weak, almost perceptible shake. My jaw tightened, impatience flared. "Do not test my patience," I warned, my voice low, dangerous. I forced the spoon closer to her lips. She still resisted, her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Drink," I commanded, my voice growing harsher, a thread of the true threat woven into it. This wasn't about care, it was about control. About ensuring my instrument remained functional. About ensuring Arkady would suffer the full, prolonged agony of his daughter's despair, a despair I would meticulously manage. Finally, with a barely audible sigh, she parted her lips. The broth, slowly, carefully, slid down her throat. Her eyes remained empty, fixed on some point beyond me, beyond the room, beyond this reality. I continued, spoon by agonizing spoon, until the bowl was empty. She swallowed each mouthful without complaint, without protest, like an automaton. A deadness in her that pierced even my hardened shell. I set the empty bowl aside, a grim satisfaction settling over me. "A servant will be here shortly with more food and medicine," I repeated, my voice firm, already walking towards the door. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't look back.
Chapter 14. Weeks had passed since that night on the bathroom floor, since Igor found me. My body had healed. My spirit remained shattered. The dacha felt like a mausoleum now. Silence filled its rooms, broken only by servants' footsteps and my own shallow breathing. I moved through days like a ghost, drifting between my bedroom and the gardens, always watched by Igor's guards. Sometimes I managed to return to the Serpov gallery, clinging to the familiar ritual of curation. But even there, his ownership pressed down like a weight on my chest. I was a prisoner in silk and marble. Despite the humiliation of our wedding night, I felt something shameful blooming in my chest. Gratitude. He hadn't brought anyone home since then. No laughter echoing through the halls, no whispered intimacies bleeding through walls. The absence wasn't kindness, I knew that. But it let me breathe. My thoughts circled back to him like water finding a drain. Igor, the boy with dirt on his knees, pressing wildflowers into my palm. The man who now looked through me like glass. Every morning I woke hungry for him, for his voice, his touch, even his cruelty. It was pathetic. It was undeniable. I would sit by the window, seeing not the manicured gardens, but the wild vineyard behind our childhood dacha. Igor's hands reaching for mine, his laughter caught in summer leaves. He had been my entire world. Tragically, he still was. The reprieve didn't last. The charity gala glittered like broken glass. Moscow's elite swirled through the ballroom in silk and diamonds, their false smiles sharp as knives. I stood beside my father, trying to disappear into the wallpaper when the air shifted. Igor entered like a storm front. Every head turned. Every conversation paused. He wasn't alone. She was stunning. Blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders, confidence radiating from her smile. His hand rested on her back as he guided her through the crowd. They stopped to greet dignitaries, her laughter bright and musical. He bent close to whisper in her ear, kissed her cheek, brushed his lips across her knuckles. Each gesture was a blade between my ribs. I couldn't look away, couldn't breathe. This was the performance I dreaded. He positioned each touch, timed each smile, ensuring I witnessed every moment. The message was clear. This is what you'll never have. My father's jaw tightened beside me. His humiliation matched my own, another victory in Igor's campaign of revenge. The crowd watched, too. Their gazes flicked between Igor's display and my stone face, calculating. In our world, arranged marriages were business, but most couples maintained the illusion of partnership. Igor was making a different statement entirely. This is conquest, this is ownership, this is what defeat looks like. Their pity burned worse than contempt. This became my life. A low thrum of fear and longing punctuated by public torture. Igor lived in the house like a ghost made of ice, present but untouchable. I'd glimpse him in corridors, moving with predatory grace, guards trailing behind. If our paths crossed, his eyes would slide over me without recognition. Less than a second, less than nothing. He spoke to me through servants now. Brief, clinical instructions. Miss Ivanova will dine in her room. Inform Miss Ivanova the study is required. Each impersonal command carved away another piece of my heart. I was his wife in name only, a title that mocked everything the word should mean. Trapped in this beautiful prison, consumed by love for a man who refused to see me, living in the shadow of his hatred for my father. A hatred that now included me. The cruelest part, despite everything, the humiliation, the coldness, the calculated cruelty, I still loved him. Seeing him with other women didn't just break my heart, it shattered what was left of my soul.
Chapter 15. The silence in my study was heavy, broken only by the soft click of my laptop's trackpad and the faint hum of its cooling fan. Weeks had bled into months since the wedding, since that unsettling morning I'd found Elara on the bathroom floor. My meticulously planned vengeance against Arkady was a relentless, grinding machine of financial strikes and whispered rumors. Yet the anticipated rush of triumph remained elusive, replaced by a profound, unsettling emptiness that gnawed at me from within. I had largely compartmentalized the incident with Elara, labeling it an unforeseen complication, a momentary lapse in her compliance. Her feverish surrender had been inconvenient, not the elegant, psychological suffering I had envisioned. I wanted her to endure, to witness, to despair, not to simply fade. My anger, a cold, clinical fury, had initially been directed at her passive resistance, her refusal to eat, her utter lack of fight. I had forced her to consume the broth to regain her strength, to ensure she was functional. Functional, so she could truly feel the agony I intended for her father, to be a living mirror reflecting his downfall. And as for other women, I hadn't brought anyone else back to the dacha since that wedding night. It wasn't out of any newfound consideration for Elara, I repeatedly told myself. It was simply inefficient. The point had been made. The message delivered with brutal clarity. To repeat it would dilute its impact, turn a singular, devastating blow into a tiresome routine. Yet a part of me, the part that still rebelled against my own cold logic, knew it was more than just efficiency. The thought of bringing another woman into the dacha now, knowing Elara was there, a ghost in her own home, carried a strange, unwelcome weight. The perverse satisfaction of that first night had been fleeting, leaving only that bitter, lingering ash, a taste of emptiness that clung to my palate. This silent agreement not to inflict further domestic humiliation felt less like mercy and more like an odd, unspoken truce that I didn't fully comprehend. Vladislav had noticed my shift subtly. He was too attuned to me, too steeped in our shared history of vengeance, to miss the nuances of my behavior. He hadn't questioned the lack of female companions in my quarters, merely observed. Our strategic meetings had grown longer, more intense, focusing solely on the crushing blows against Arkady's empire. But my brother, for all his perception, could not see the silent battlefield within me. He saw the cold, calculated machine. He didn't see the man haunted by the deadness in Elara's eyes, nor the tattoo on my arm, now a heavy, conflicted presence under my sleeve. My study, usually a sanctuary of cold reason, now felt stifling. The familiar triumph wasn't there. Instead, my gaze kept drifting towards the west wing, towards her rooms. It was an involuntary pull, a persistent undercurrent beneath the surface of my control. It was absurd. I had orchestrated this. I had wielded her as a weapon. Her suffering was a means to an end, a reflection of Arkady's betrayal. So why did her silent, vacant presence feel like a failure rather than a victory? The need to intensify Arkady's torment, to make him fully aware of Elara's captive state, pushed me to further action. It was time to escalate the public humiliation, to drive home the point of my absolute ownership with more frequency and greater overtness. This cycle of public cruelty was designed to drain every last vestige of hope from them both. I began to attend even more high-profile social functions, corporate galas, and exclusive art exhibitions. Specifically, those I knew Elara, in her subdued capacity, would still be compelled to attend, usually accompanying her father on his desperate quest for allies, or simply to maintain appearances. And at each of these events I made sure I was not alone. Different women, always beautiful, always exquisitely dressed, their eyes bright with ambition or genuine admiration. I would select them carefully, ensuring they understood their role in the public theater. I would engage them in animated conversation, my hand resting casually on their lower back, my head bent close as if sharing a whispered secret. And then the deliberate act, a kiss, not passionate, not intimate, but public. A peck on the cheek, a lingering brush of lips against a hand, a casual embrace that spoke volumes. Each action precisely timed, precisely positioned, to ensure Elara was forced to witness it. My eyes would find hers across the crowded room, watching the flinch, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way she would subtly turn away, her face paling. It was a cold satisfaction, a direct hit. She couldn't escape it. Her pain, her quiet humiliation was now a public spectacle, another layer of Arkady's undoing. While I committed these acts, a deeper, unsettling doubt occasionally surfaced. The hollow feeling persisted. This cycle of public cruelty, while effective in its aim, felt draining. I acknowledged her suffering, yes, but dismissed it as necessary for my revenge. Yet the sharp, raw pain that I saw reflected in her eyes, even from across a room, felt different from the distant satisfaction of bankrupting Arkady. It was too personal, too close. The tattoo on my arm pulsed with a dull ache, its meaning blurring between hatred and something I refused to name. I avoided bringing women into the dacha, though I still told myself it was solely for efficiency. The thought of inflicting that specific torment again felt unnecessary. The public display was enough, for now. My focus remained fixed on the ultimate prize. Arkady was cornered, his empire bleeding. The time for the final crushing ultimatum was approaching. I would prepare it meticulously, ensuring it would strip him of everything but his life, leaving him to witness Elara's despair. Chapter 16. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive champagne, forced laughter, and the cloying perfume of ambition. Another charity gala, another orchestrated public display. Weeks had bled into months since the wedding, and my vengeance against Arkady was nearing its brutal zenith. I performed the role of the new, powerful Rostislav, charming, ruthless, and utterly detached. My arm was linked with a senator's daughter, a beautiful, vapid woman named Svetlana, her eyes wide with admiration for my influence. My gaze, however, kept drifting. Across the glittering expanse of the ballroom, I saw Elara. She was with Arkady, her father's arm a possessive grip on her elbow, parading her like a shield against his crumbling reputation. She wore another of her muted gowns, a dark emerald silk that, despite its richness, seemed to swallow the light, reflecting the quiet despair in her posture. Yet, even in her subdued state, her innate grace, her delicate beauty was undeniable, and others noticed. I watched from across the room as a junior minister, young and eager, lingered too long by her side, his gaze overtly admiring. Then a prominent industrialist, a man known for his philandering, offered her a deep, almost familiar bow, his smile lingering. A cold, unfamiliar heat flared in my gut. Not anger, not exactly. Something sharper, a possessive urge, a primal, unwelcome jealousy that clawed at my carefully constructed detachment. She was mine, my instrument, my property, to be broken by me, not admired by others. Svetlana was talking about some new art exhibition, her voice a pleasant drone. I nodded, feigning interest, but my eyes remained fixed on Elara. The way her head tilted slightly when she listened, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she raised her champagne flute. It was her vulnerability, her quiet dignity, that seemed to draw these men in, and it grated on me. It was a challenge to my control, a breach in the carefully orchestrated isolation I had built around her. I excused myself from Svetlana, leaving her mid-sentence, my abruptness a calculated display of power. My movements were swift, purposeful, cutting a direct path through the clusters of gossiping elites. The tattoo on my forearm, Elara's eyes, burned with a renewed, almost painful intensity. It was supposed to symbolize my hatred, my ultimate triumph over Arkady. But seeing her draw unwanted attention, it felt like a raw wound, a mark of something I had lost and was now inexplicably desperate to reclaim, even if only to deny it to anyone else. I reached her, my hand clamping down on her elbow, firm, possessive, startling her. Her eyes, those wide, luminous eyes, shot up to mine, filled with shock and then a desperate, undeniable longing that ignited a dangerous spark within me. "We are leaving," I stated, my voice low, dangerous, audible only to her. My grip tightened, guiding her away from her father, who merely watched, defeated, as I claimed her. I pulled her through the throng of guests, past the curious glances and whispered questions. She offered no resistance, her steps quickening to match mine, her body surprisingly pliant against my touch. The subtle scent of midnight irises, always present on her, mingled with the cloying perfume of the gala, creating a heady, confusing mix. The drive back to the Dasha was tense, silent. She sat beside me, her gaze fixed on the passing city lights, her breath shallow. I could feel the tremor in her hands, the rapid pulse in her wrist where my fingers still wrapped around her. She wanted this. The realization was a perverse kind of triumph, adding another layer to the twisted game. I led her directly into the Dasha, past the surprised, silent guards. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The possessive rage, the cold satisfaction of Arkady's torment, and beneath it all, a dark, unwelcome current of desire that had been simmering for years, now threatening to erupt. I pulled her up the grand staircase, ignoring the hushed whispers of the servants who must have noticed her drawn face, the barely contained tension between us. I opened the door to my master bedroom, the grand, opulent suite that she knew was mine, the one I had occupied with Anya on our wedding night. Her eyes widened as she stepped inside, sweeping over the familiar masculine decor. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of recognition in her gaze, a shadow of the previous humiliation. She knew. She understood the implication of this room. But then it was gone, swallowed by a desperate hunger that was a mirror to my own. She ignored the unspoken history of the room, her focus solely on me. I pushed the door shut with my foot, plunging the room into a dim, intimate light. The air crackled with a raw, unspoken tension. I turned to her, my gaze raking over her face, searching for any sign of resistance, any hint of the deadness I'd seen in her eyes before. There was none, only a desperate, yearning vulnerability. "Igor," she whispered, her voice raw, trembling, almost a plea. I seized her, pulling her against me. My mouth crashed down on hers, demanding, bruising. It was not a kiss of passion, not of tenderness. It was a raw claim, fueled by years of suppressed rage, possessive jealousy, and a twisted, desperate need to assert my dominance over her, over the ghost of our past. I tasted fear, yes, but also a deep, buried sweetness, a desperate reciprocation that slammed into me with unexpected force. My hands tangled in her hair, pulling her head back, deepening the kiss, forcing her to submit, to acknowledge my ownership. Her body was pliant, yielding to my demands, almost eager in its response. The encounter was a maelstrom of raw, brutal sensation. It was a claiming, a physical assertion of power, devoid of the gentle warmth of true affection. She clung to me, her fingers digging into my shoulders, her breath ragged against my ear. My every movement was driven by a need to inflict pain through possession, to leave an undeniable mark, to make her feel the full weight of her new reality. Yet, even in the depths of my calculated cruelty, a faint, unwelcome tremor of something else pulsed beneath the surface, something that felt dangerously close to actual sensation, to a long-buried desire that defied my control. Afterward, the master bedroom was silent save for our ragged breathing. The physical act was over. The perverse satisfaction had faded, leaving behind only the familiar, bitter taste of ash. I rolled away from her, the warmth of her body against mine abruptly gone. I sat up, pulling on my robe, the silk a cold barrier against the sudden chill that had settled over me. She lay there, still, silent, her back to me. "Elara," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Get dressed. Compose yourself." Her body stiffened. Slowly she turned, her eyes meeting mine. They were wide, luminous, swimming with unshed tears, but also a profound, bewildered hurt. A stark contrast to the passionate response she had shown moments before. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw, trembling. She reached out a tentative hand, her fingers brushing the bare skin of my forearm, directly over the tattoo. "My eyes," she murmured, her voice barely audible, a fragile question. Does it mean anything to you now? Do you remember anything? The promises?" The question sliced through me, a direct hit to the raw nerve of my buried past. The tattoo burned, a searing brand of internal conflict. For a fleeting second, the image of that innocent boy, who had carved her eyes onto his skin with such pure, boundless love, flashed through my mind. The tenderness, the whispered promises after our youthful encounters before the betrayal. But he was dead. Buried. And in his place was a monster forged by Arkady's treachery. My jaw tightened, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth. I forced the words out, each one a shard of ice, calculated to crush the last ember of hope. "It means you are mine, Elara. A mark of possession, a reminder of what I claim, and nothing more." My gaze held hers, brutal and unforgiving, ensuring she understood the depth of the cruelty. "Its meaning, like everything else you cherished, has been transformed by your father's treachery. It signifies only my hatred for him, and my absolute ownership of his weakness. Nothing more. Don't confuse past tenderness with present reality. That boy is dead." I saw the light die in her eyes, extinguished by my cruel words, leaving behind only the haunting void I had witnessed that morning after our wedding. Her hand fell from my arm, her fingers curling into a tight fist against her gown. Her shoulders slumped, a silent surrender. My work here was done. I strode out of the master bedroom, leaving her lying there, a broken figure in the rumpled sheets. My mind was already calculating the next move against Arkady, the final squeeze. The internal ache persisted, a dull throb beneath the surface of my triumph. But I ignored it. It was a phantom pain, a weakness that had to be purged. My vengeance demanded it.
Chapter 17. The silence that descended upon the master bedroom after Igor's departure was not a comforting hush, but a deafening roar. It screamed with the raw, brutal echoes of what had just transpired, vibrating in my bones, chilling me to the core. He had left me lying there in the rumpled sheets. my body still tingling with the lingering physical aftershocks of his demanding touch, my mind a maelstrom of confusion, shame, and a terrifying, desperate hope. "Get dressed. Compose yourself. Your composure reflects on me." His words, flat and devoid of warmth, were a brutal dismissal, a final twist of the knife after an act that felt both utterly personal and terrifyingly impersonal. My body felt heavy, bruised in places I couldn't name, and yet a strange, unwelcome warmth still pulsed through my veins, a ghost of the frantic energy that had consumed me moments before. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands against them, desperate to block out the images that flashed behind my eyelids. His face, hard and possessive as he kissed me, the raw, almost brutal hunger in his eyes, the way my body, traitorous and weak, had yielded and, yes, had even responded to his dominating touch. The humiliation was a hot flush that spread over my skin, mingling with the phantom chill of his sudden withdrawal. Why? The question screamed in my mind, a relentless, agonizing echo. Why had he done it? Was it simply another act of cruelty, another way to assert his ownership, to leave an undeniable physical mark of his dominance? Was it a twisted message to my father, a final, intimate humiliation delivered through me? Or was there even a sliver of something else? A hidden desire, a buried passion, a flicker of the boy I remembered, struggling beneath layers of ice and hatred. My heart, foolish and defiant, clung to that impossible hope, even as my mind replayed his last words, brutal and clear. "It means you are mine, Elara, a mark of possession, a reminder of what I claim, and nothing more." Don't confuse past tenderness with present reality. That boy is dead. That boy. The one who had etched my eyes onto his forearm as a symbol of eternal love. The one who had whispered promises of forever under a starlit sky. The one who had, after our innocent, fumbling acts of teenage intimacy, held me close, his touch impossibly tender, his voice soft with genuine affection, his words full of comfort and certainty. The stark contrast between that memory and the raw, unfeeling encounter moments ago, his brutal words twisting the meaning of his very first tattoo, tore at my soul. It wasn't just a physical act, it was a psychological assault, designed to shatter the very core of my being, to break the last vestiges of hope I clung to. I forced myself out of bed, each movement an effort, my limbs heavy with emotional exhaustion. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my rumpled gown, running a shaky hand through my disheveled hair. Compose myself, his command, my new reality. A trophy wife, a beautiful prisoner, forced to maintain a facade of composure, even as my world crumbled around me. I walked to the full-length mirror, staring at the stranger reflected there. Eyes red-rimmed, lips still slightly swollen, a haunted expression that spoke volumes of a pain I couldn't articulate. This was me now, the instrument of his vengeance. The next few days were a blur of numb existence within the dacha. Igor was often absent, consumed by his business, or so his servants stated. But when he was home, I felt his presence like a cold, oppressive weight. The public cruelty, which had begun weeks ago, continued with an intensified, relentless rhythm. Igor maintained his appearances at social functions and corporate events, always with different women on his arm, each one more beautiful, more overtly affectionate than the last. He would orchestrate their encounters with a chilling precision, ensuring our paths crossed, that I was forced to witness his calculated charade. I saw his fake smiles, his chillingly convincing displays of charm, knowing they were meant to torment me, to torment my father. He made sure Arkady, too, saw these public mockeries of our marriage. My father's face would tighten, his jaw clench, as he witnessed his daughter's humiliation, another layer of Igor's relentless vengeance against him. These were not women he brought home to the dacha. No. That particular torment had, mercifully, not been repeated since that first night. He never allowed them beyond the threshold of our shared home, a small, cold comfort I clung to amidst the constant agony. But their public presence, his public performance of affection, was a fresh, agonizing wound. Each scene was a twist of the knife in my already broken heart. I was forced to stand there a silent spectator to his calculated charade, my internal world screaming even as my public face remained composed. I was trapped in this gilded cage, consumed by a love he refused to acknowledge. Chapter 18. The constant nausea began subtly, a faint unease in my stomach that I initially dismissed as lingering effects of the fever, or perhaps the relentless emotional strain of my gilded prison. But as the weeks crawled on, it intensified, a persistent, churning discomfort that made the very thought of food repulsive. My mornings became a torturous ritual of suppressed heaving, a desperate attempt to hide the uncontrollable spasms of my body from the ever-present servants. Fatigue clung to me like a shroud, an exhaustion far deeper than mere sleepless nights, draining my energy even after hours of rest. I tried to ignore the growing list of symptoms, to rationalize them away. The strange metallic taste in my mouth, the sudden, inexplicable cravings for foods I once detested, and an equally strong aversion to my usual favorites. My breasts felt tender, swollen, an unfamiliar ache that made even the softest fabric irritating. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, replacing the fear of Igor's cruelty with a new, terrifying anxiety. It was a suspicion, whispered by a primal instinct, that my logical mind desperately tried to silence. I finally stole away one afternoon, feigning a trip to the gallery, and discreetly visited a small private clinic on the outskirts of the city, one far from Arkady's or Igor's usual circles. The doctor, a kind, elderly woman with a gentle gaze, confirmed my darkest fears and my most impossible, terrifying hope: pregnant. The word echoed in the sterile quiet of the examination room, a thunderclap in the desolate landscape of my life. Pregnant. From that night. From his brutal, possessive claim in his master bedroom. A child, his child. A life stirring within me, a tiny, vulnerable being, a direct, undeniable consequence of his hatred and my desperate, foolish yearning. Terror, cold and absolute, gripped me. How could this be? How could I, a prisoner of a loveless marriage, a pawn in a brutal game of vengeance, carry new life? The joy, the overwhelming joy that should accompany such news, was utterly eclipsed by a crushing wave of fear. What would Igor say? How would he react? He saw me as no one, a tool, a mark of possession. Would he see this child as merely another instrument of his revenge? A new, more potent way to torment Arkady? The thought turned my stomach, a fresh wave of nausea, both physical and emotional. I could not tell him. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The fear was too great. The fear that he would blame me, accuse me of trapping him, of orchestrating this to gain some leverage. The fear that he would resent this innocent life, a physical manifestation of a night he had used to assert dominance, not to create connection. I imagined his cold, contemptuous gaze, his dismissive words, blaming me for this unwelcome consequence. I could not bear to see that hatred directed at my unborn child. I decided, with a fierce, desperate resolve, that this secret would be mine alone. A tiny, fragile secret in the depths of my gilded cage. I would protect this life, even if it meant burying my own fears deeper than ever before. The cycle of Igor's public cruelty continued in the weeks that followed. He attended events, always with a different woman, always performing his elaborate charade of affection for the world to see. Each display was a fresh wound, but my mind was now consumed by this new, overwhelming secret. I moved through the galas and dinners like a ghost, my composure more brittle than ever, my hands often clutching at my stomach, as if to physically protect the burgeoning life within. Igor, in his infrequent, unavoidable encounters, sometimes noticed my change. I would try to hide the bouts of nausea, rushing to the nearest powder room, pretending a sudden headache. But sometimes, when we were forced to sit at the same table, he would catch my subtle grimace, my aversion to a particular food. His eyes, sharp and assessing even in their coldness, would flick to me. "You look unwell, Elara," he said once, his voice flat, devoid of concern, during a tense dinner with business associates. He didn't offer comfort or even a pretense of it. "Get yourself checked by a doctor. Your health reflects on me." His words were a detached command, a reminder of my status as his property, not his wife. Another time, he saw me quietly excusing myself from a gathering, my hand pressed to my mouth. He merely frowned. "Are you ill again? See the dacha physician immediately. I require no weaknesses displayed." His tone was dismissive, an order rather than a question. He had no idea. His cold indifference, his lack of true concern, solidified my resolve. I could not tell him. Not now. The risk was too great. The fear of his reaction, of his hatred for this innocent life, was a weight too heavy to bear. I clung to my secret, a fragile spark of hope and terror in the suffocating silence of my gilded cage. My child. Mine. I would protect it, fiercely, silently, even if it meant walking through fire alone. Chapter 19. The dacha, with its suffocating opulence and constant silent watch, had become my entire world. My secret, the tiny life stirring within me, was the only thing that felt real, a fragile pulse of hope in the desolate landscape of my existence. I moved through my days in a constant state of hyper-awareness, my hands instinctively, subtly, protecting my still flat stomach, my mind consumed by the terrifying question of how to survive, how to protect this precious, vulnerable life. Igor's cold indifference to my morning sickness, his dismissive commands to get myself checked by a doctor, only strengthened my resolve to keep this secret buried deep. He had no idea, and I prayed he never would. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a seemingly ordinary day. I had convinced myself that a walk in the dacha's sprawling, manicured gardens would do me good, the fresh air a respite from the stuffy confines of my rooms and the constant, low thrum of fear. Igor was reportedly away on a business trip, a rare extended absence. The guards, Igor's men, were positioned as usual, visible but distant. I found a secluded bench near the ancient rose bushes, the scent of their fading blooms offering a fleeting comfort. My hand rested instinctively on my stomach, a silent communion with the life growing within. The attack came with shocking speed, tearing through the afternoon's quiet like a lightning bolt. No warning, no shouted commands, just the sudden, brutal impact. A rough hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream before it could even begin. Another arm snaked around my waist, lifting me, dragging me from the bench with terrifying force. My small bag, clutched in my hand, fell to the ground with a soft thud. Panic, cold and raw, flooded my veins. My mind screamed, Igor's guards. Where are Igor's guards? But they were nowhere. The men who had seized me were not his. They were strangers, their faces hard, eyes cold, their movements brutally efficient. Quiet little bird, a gravelly voice hissed near my ear, thick with a foreign accent I didn't recognize. Unless you want to make this even harder on yourself. I thrashed, my small body twisting, kicking, fighting with a desperate ferocity I didn't know I possessed. My primary thought was not for myself, but for the fragile life within me. My baby. I have to protect my baby. A sharp elbow caught me in the ribs, a blinding pain that stole my breath. I stumbled, my vision blurring, but the iron grip on me held fast. She's fighting, another voice grunted, laced with annoyance. Bring her down. Then came a sickening crack, a blinding flash of white pain that exploded through my left leg. I cried out, a muffled scream against the hand clamped over my mouth. My leg buckled, sending me crashing to the ground, a wave of agony making the world spin. I felt a sharp, searing pain across my cheek as my head hit something hard, probably the edge of the stone path. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Bruises bloomed instantly on my arms as I tried to break my fall. Get her in the van! The first voice snapped. They dragged me, my broken legs screaming in protest, towards a dark, unmarked van that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, its engine idling quietly. My vision swam, but I could make out the cold, impassive faces of more men inside. They were professionals, ruthless, not petty thugs. Don't hurt her! I heard my guards shout, distantly, their voices filled with alarm. They must have finally realized what was happening, too late. Shots rang out, the sharp cracks cutting through the air, but they were already too far, too slow. My captors ignored them, shoving me roughly into the back of the van. I landed in a crumpled heap on the floor, the pain in my leg an unbearable agony. My hand flew instinctively to my stomach, a silent prayer. The doors slammed shut, plunging me into suffocating darkness. The van lurched forward, speeding away, leaving the dacha, my gilded cage, behind. I was no longer a prisoner of Igor Rostislav. I was a captive of someone far more dangerous, far more unpredictable. Terror, raw and primal, consumed me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a single, desperate thought: my child, my unborn baby. I clung to my stomach, trembling, bleeding, fighting for breath, utterly consumed by a mother's fierce, desperate fear. The world was spinning, blackness threatening to overwhelm me. I was being pulled into a darkness I couldn't comprehend, and the only thing I cared about was the fragile life within me.
Chapter 20. The sharp, insistent ring of my secure line cut through the artificial silence of my study. It wasn't the usual muted chime for a business call. This was an urgent, jarring sound, reserved for emergencies. My hand, usually steady, snatched the phone from its cradle. Rostislav, I barked, my voice taut with immediate irritation. I had been reviewing Arkady's latest financial unraveling, a cold satisfaction beginning to settle, only for this interruption. Igor? Vladislav's voice, usually a low, calm rumble, was strained, sharp with an urgency I rarely heard. It's Elara. My blood ran cold. The single word, his tone, hit me like a physical blow. My mind, usually a fortress of cold logic, reeled, anticipating the worst, yet utterly unprepared. What about her? I demanded, my grip tightening on the phone, my knuckles white. Abducted, he stated, the word a stark, horrifying hammer blow that echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. From the dacha gardens, witnesses confirmed, violently taken. My carefully constructed world shattered around me. Abducted? From my dacha? The thought was a grotesque violation, a direct challenge to the absolute control I prided myself on. My guards, Vladislav's men, were supposed to be impenetrable. How could this have happened? A surge of pure, unadulterated rage, far hotter and more volatile than any calculated hatred, ripped through me. It was a primal, territorial fury. She was mine, my property, my instrument of vengeance, and someone dared to take her. Vladislav continued, his voice grim. Reports indicate physical harm, a leg injury, possible head trauma from the fall during the struggle. The words sliced through the rising tide of anger, plunging me into a deeper, colder abyss of terror. Physical harm. The two words echoed, twisting the knife in my gut. My vengeance, my carefully orchestrated torment of her, had been psychological, emotional. It had been about breaking her spirit, yes, but always, always with a calculated boundary. I had never intended physical harm. The thought of her genuinely hurt, not just emotionally wounded by my words or actions, but brutally, physically violated by some unknown entity. It ignited a primal, terrifying fire within me that scorched away every last vestige of my cold detachment. The image of her pale face, bruised, bleeding, crumpled on the cold ground, flashed in my mind's eye with sickening clarity. My hands, usually so steady, trembled violently. The tattoo on my forearm, Elara's eyes, burned, no longer a symbol of hatred or possession, but a searing brand of regret, of horrifying realization. My vengeance, my endless cycle of public cruelty, my calculated humiliation of her. It had put her in this grave danger. My actions had left her vulnerable, exposed to the kind of brutal, uncontrolled violence that Arkady's betrayal had first unleashed upon my father. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, metallic and acrid. Arkady Borodin is frantic, Vladislav added, a low rumble from the phone. Good. Let him suffer. But the thought brought no satisfaction. My gaze returned to the dark windows, seeing only the words, broken leg, head trauma. The perimeter was breached, cleanly. Professionals, Vladislav continued, relaying the initial intelligence. No identifiable markings on the vehicle. This wasn't Borodin's doing. It wasn't ours, a third party. He understood the gravity of this. My carefully cultivated composure shattered entirely. I slammed the phone onto its receiver, the sharp crack echoing in the room. I didn't pace. I moved. Vladislav, I bit out, my voice raw, laced with a desperate plea as I strode towards the door. Every asset, every man, get them moving. I'm coming with you. My personal security detail, alerted by the sudden shift in my demeanor, snapped to attention. Vladislav's voice, though coming from a phone, felt as sharp and assessing as if he were in the room. He saw the shift, the complete and utter demolition of my previous priorities. He saw the raw, desperate fear that now consumed me, eclipsing even my lifelong thirst for vengeance. The strategic dismantling of Arkady's empire, the years of meticulous planning, the very reason I had bound Elara to me, it all evaporated, deemed utterly meaningless in the face of this new, terrifying reality. Igor, Vladislav said, his voice low, measured, a rare moment of direct confrontation. What about Borodin? His empire is on the brink. Your ultimate ultimatum was planned for tonight. This could be a tactical advantage, leverage. He was testing me, confirming the depth of my despair. Arkady Borodin is irrelevant, I snarled, my voice cracking with the force of my conviction. He means nothing. His ruin means nothing. Not compared to her. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't my torment. Someone else touched her. Someone else hurt her. And I will burn the world to the ground to get her back. My voice was a low growl, filled with a promise of unimaginable violence that would shake the city to its core. Every single asset, every man, pull them from Borodin, focus them on finding Elara. You understand, she is the only thing that matters now. My world is nothing without her. I don't care about strategy now, only retrieval. Vladislav was silent for a moment on the other end, processing the raw emotion, the complete reversal of my long-held purpose. He didn't argue, he merely nodded, a grim acceptance settling over his features. He saw the change, the terrifying clarity in my eyes. He saw the desperation. And in that moment, for the first time in years, he saw past the cold, calculated mask, past the layers of vengeance to the raw, human fear beneath. He saw his brother, stripped bare. I am mobilizing every resource, Vladislav stated, his voice firm, his commitment absolute. Every lead, every shadow, we will find out who did this, and they will pay. Your car is ready. Meet me at the main command hub. We'll coordinate from there. Your intelligence network will be crucial. He wasn't giving me orders, not truly. He was guiding my frantic, desperate energy into the most effective channels, acknowledging my need for direct involvement. I'm coming, I ground out, already halfway out the study door. Find her, Vladislav. Bring her back. I strode through the silent dasha, my own furious footsteps echoing in the oppressive quiet. My entire world had shattered. All thoughts of vengeance against Arkady were eclipsed by one terrifying, desperate, overwhelming need: to find Elara and bring her home. I would find her, or I would die trying. Chapter 21. The drive to the main command hub felt interminable, each second a grinding eternity. The sleek, armored car cut through the Moscow night, but the city lights outside were a blur, my focus consumed by the raw, terrifying void where Elara should have been. Vladislav had met me at the Dhaka gates, his face grim, his posture coiled with the same urgent tension that now consumed me. He hadn't questioned my decision to join the hunt directly. He had simply directed me to the car, his commitment absolute. The command hub, usually a sterile, controlled environment of glowing screens and hushed voices, was a maelstrom of frantic activity. Maps of Moscow and its surrounding regions blazed across massive monitors, grids of light pulsing with data. Operators barked orders into headsets, their fingers flying across keyboards, tracking movements, cross-referencing intelligence. Vladislav, already in his element, stood at the central console, his voice a low, steady command cutting through the chaos. His tattoos, usually a subtle statement, seemed to darken and shift as his muscles tensed with exertion. Initial sweep of local hospitals yielded nothing, Vladislav reported, without looking up, his voice tight. No unidentified female admissions matching Elara's description. The abduction was too clean for a random street kidnapping. They had a destination. My jaw clenched. Their destination is irrelevant. Find her, and find out who dared to take what's mine. The words were devoid of my usual cold calculation, replaced by a desperate, primal urgency. The analytical part of my mind, usually so dominant, was drowned out by the roaring fear. Vladislav turned to me, his gaze piercing, unwavering. There's one more piece of intel. Arkady Borodin is demanding an immediate meeting. He's hysterical. Claims he has information. The name Arkady Borodin ripped through me, a fresh surge of loathing. My hands clenched into fists, the tattoo on my forearm burning with renewed intensity. The very man who had shattered my world, whose empire I had systematically dismantled, whose daughter I had taken as a brutal extension of my revenge. And now he wanted to meet? The thought was repulsive. My first instinct was to refuse, to dismiss him as irrelevant, just as I had dismissed him hours ago. But Vladislav's eyes held a subtle, pointed message. Arkady was Elara's father. He might genuinely know something, however small, and in this desperate hour I would grasp at any thread. Arrange it, I grated, the words tasting like ash. Now, but I go alone. My men stay outside, his too. This is between him and me. Vladislav nodded, a flicker of grim understanding in his eyes. He knew the depth of the hatred that simmered between Arkady and me, a hatred that stemmed from a betrayal far older and deeper than any recent power struggle. He also understood that I was willing to set aside anything, even my burning desire for Arkady's complete ruin, for Elara. This fragile, uneasy truce was a desperate measure. We arrived at Arkady's private compound minutes later. The place was a fortress of fear, heavily guarded, its air thick with desperation. My men took positions outside, their faces grim, their weapons ready. Arkady's own guards, pale and tense, watched me with suspicion, but parted silently. Arkady was pacing his study like a caged beast, just as Elara had described. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, devoid of their usual cunning. He looked like a man on the brink of collapse, a shadow of the powerful Don he once was. The sight should have brought me immense satisfaction, a final, perverse triumph. It brought nothing but a stark, hollow ache. He stopped abruptly as I entered, his gaze locking onto mine. For a moment, the room crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of 5 years of simmering hatred and a betrayal that spanned decades. The man standing before me was the architect of my father's ruin, the killer of the boy I once was. Every fiber of my being screamed for release, for the simple, brutal satisfaction of ending him. But Elara was gone. Rostislav, Arkady spat, his voice hoarse, raw with fear and impotent rage. Where is she? What have you done? I took a step closer, my voice a low, dangerous growl. What have I done? You dare ask me? She was abducted from my dacha, from my protection, because of the war you started, because of the chaos you allowed to fester. My words were a physical blow, filled with years of suppressed fury. Someone else touched her, Borodin. Someone else hurt her, and I will burn the world to the ground to get her back, and you will help me. His eyes widened, raw terror replacing the anger. I don't know who. I swear, I have no part in this. This is Zhenya Krylov, the Grizzly. He's been moving in, taking advantage of our conflict. He targeted her to get to both of us. Arkady gestured wildly at his desk, covered in disorganized papers, a map with various territories marked. He's been hitting my operations too, subtly. I thought it was you, escalating. But this is his signature. Brutal, unpredictable. Zhenya Krylov. The name sent a fresh jolt through me. Vladislav had reported whispers of his movements, an opportunistic scavenger. But to hit like this, my mind, even in its frantic state, began to connect the dots. The timing, the brutal efficiency, it fit. What do you know about him? I demanded, my voice sharp, cutting through his rambling. Where would he take her? Arkady, desperate, began to talk, pouring out every scrap of information, every rumor he had collected on the Grizzly, every known hideout, every potential weakness. His words were a torrent, a desperate attempt to gain my favor, to save his daughter. I listened, my mind filing away every detail, filtering out the fear, seeking only the actionable intelligence. Igor, Vladislav's voice, calm and steady, came through my earpiece. I had forgotten I still had it on. He must have been listening from the command hub. Allow me to come over. We can coordinate with Borodin's fragmented network. This is too critical. We need to consolidate. I hesitated. Allowing Arkady direct access to our full operational capabilities, to our strategies, was a risk. But Elara, she was physically harmed, and possibly my mind wouldn't let itself complete the thought. Fine, I bit out, my voice raw, to Vladislav. Come, but Elara is the sole priority. Arkady Borodin, his empire, his fate, it's all secondary now, understand? Understood, brother, Vladislav responded, a rare softness in his tone. Her safety is all that matters. His words were a lifeline, a shared understanding that cut through the years of coldness, of my careful emotional detachment. He knew. He saw past the hatred, past the vengeance, to the raw, terrifying truth that consumed me. The boy who loved Elara, a boy I thought dead, was screaming inside. And Vladislav, my stoic, unyielding brother, was acknowledging that scream. For the first time, I didn't feel completely alone. Chapter 22. The air in the command hub, already thick with the scent of coffee and frayed nerves, grew taut with a new, dangerous energy. Vladislav arrived minutes after my call, his presence immediate and commanding. His gaze, grim and resolute, swept across the bustling room, and the frantic activity for a moment seemed to sharpen into a more focused intensity. His tattooed arms, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his tactical shirt, were a testament to the brutal resolve he brought to every task. Arkady's intelligence is thin, but it's a start, Vladislav said, walking directly to the large tactical map that now dominated the central monitor. Zhenya Krylov operates like a ghost. No fixed addresses, no consistent network. He relies on isolated cells, disposable assets. But Borodin's paranoia, for once, yielded something useful. A few names, a few recent, unexplained disappearances of low-level enforcers who had crossed Krylov. It's a pattern. My mind, still reeling from the raw shock of Elara's abduction and physical harm, struggled to process the intricate details. But the urgency, the desperate need to find her, cut through the fog. Then find them, I snarled, my voice raw, laced with the desperate plea that had surprised even myself. Every lead, every shadow, I don't care who we have to go through. Just find her. Vladislav nodded, his eyes meeting mine, a shared understanding passing between us that went beyond words. He saw past the cold, strategic front I usually maintained. He saw the stripped bare desperation, and for the first time, I allowed him to. Our shared grief for our father, our lifelong pursuit of vengeance, had always been a bond. Now, a new, terrifying thread wove through it, the fear of losing Elara. "We are already pulling all assets from Borodin's dismantling," Vladislav confirmed, his voice low, firm. "Every man is being reassigned to the search. My best trackers are already in the field, analyzing the Dhaka grounds, reviewing security footage from every camera within a 10-kilometer radius." He pointed to several blinking red dots on the digital map. "We have a few potential points of interest. Recent movements of unmarked vehicles. They fit Krylov's known patterns." The command hub transformed into a hive of frantic, unified action. My legitimate business contacts, cultivated over years for financial leverage, were now repurposed. Private investigators, forensic analysts, high-tech surveillance teams, all were mobilized. Their considerable resources now focused solely on finding Elara. Vladislav, meanwhile, directed the more traditional assets, his most trusted enforcers, the hardened men who knew the city's underbelly like the back of their hand, who could extract information with brutal efficiency when gentle persuasion failed. "Coordinate with Arkady's remaining network," I instructed, my voice tight. "He may be weak, but he knows this city. He has old eyes and ears that might see what ours miss." The irony was not lost on me. Relying on the man I hated most, the man whose every breath I despised, to find the woman who was my torment and my salvation. But Elara's safety now eclipsed all other considerations. Days blurred into a relentless, exhausting blur of searching, of dead ends, of false leads that burned brightly only to fizzle into bitter disappointment. I didn't sleep, couldn't. My mind was a constant loop of frantic calculations, of replaying the last moments I saw her, of imagining the fear in her eyes. I pushed my teams mercilessly, demanded impossible feats of intelligence gathering. Vladislav, equally relentless, never faltered. He was a machine, driven by the same grim purpose, his tattoos seeming to hum with the unspoken promise of vengeance against Genya Krylov. "We have a confirmed location." Vladislav's voice crackled through my earpiece, shattering the oppressive silence of my study. I had been staring at the tactical map for hours, watching the blinking dots move, searching for a pattern, a sign. An old abandoned factory complex on the city's industrial edge. Krylov has used it before for temporary holding. Our men confirmed recent activity. A jolt of adrenaline, cold and sharp, shot through me, cutting through the exhaustion. Physical harm, the words echoed in my mind. Broken leg, head trauma. The image of her, curled on the bathroom floor, vulnerable, surged back with brutal clarity. And now the knowledge that she was physically hurt by this animal, this Genya Krylov, filled me with a raw, primal rage that eclipsed any previous hatred. My calculated vengeance against Arkady felt almost tame in comparison. This was different. This was visceral. "Mobilize," I bid out, my voice strained, hoarse with the effort of control. "Every available man. I'm coming with them. Get me a tactical readout of the complex, entry points, security, everything." "Igor," Vladislav began, a hint of concern in his voice. "This is dangerous. Krylov is ruthless. I need you here to command." "I am commanding, Vladislav," I snarled, pushing myself away from my desk, already grabbing my tactical vest and securing my personal weapon. "My place is there, with her. He will regret the day he touched her. Get the teams ready, now." Vladislav didn't argue further. He understood. He saw the dangerous fire in my eyes, a fury that was no longer just about vengeance, but about something far more profound. A desperate need to protect. My rage was cold, controlled, precise. But this was untamed. This was raw. This was about Elara, and I would burn the world to the ground to get her back.
Chapter 23. The darkness that enveloped me in Genya Krylov's captivity was absolute, suffocating. It was a tangible thing, heavy and cold, pressing in on me, mirroring the terror that gnawed at my insides. My broken legs screamed in protest with every shift, every jarring movement of the vehicle that had snatched me from the dacha gardens. The sharp pain in my head from hitting the ground throbbed relentlessly. But the physical agony, immense as it was overshadowed by one overwhelming primal fear, my child, my unborn baby. I clutched my abdomen, my hands pressing against the barely discernible swell, a desperate, silent plea for protection. The journey was long, a jarring, disorienting ride that felt endless. When the van finally stopped, I was roughly pulled out, the sudden harsh light burning my eyes. We were in an old, abandoned factory complex, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. My captors were brutal, efficient, their faces impassive. They were Krylov's men, I gathered from the terse, guttural commands. Zhenya Krylov, the Grizzly, my father's new, terrifying rival. They dragged me into a cold, damp room, stripping me of my gown, replacing it with coarse, ill-fitting clothes. They checked my injuries, the doctor, a grim-faced man, leg with surprising efficiency, splinting it crudely. But he asked no questions about my nausea, about my constant need to vomit. My secret remained safe. I ate little, drank less, conserving every ounce of my energy, every flicker of my will for the life within me. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of fear and desperation. I was fed meager portions, given water, but always watched. They knew I was valuable. Leverage. But they didn't know the full extent of their prize. The nausea was constant, a relentless reminder. My body, already battered, ached with a new, tender soreness in my breasts, a subtle shift in my weight. My pregnancy, still a fragile secret, was becoming more real, more demanding. I would spend hours curled on the thin cot, my hands clasped over my stomach, whispering silent reassurances to the tiny life that depended solely on me. It was the only thing that kept me sane, the only thread connecting me to hope. I learned to listen. The voices of my captors, the distant shouts, the muffled sounds of their lives outside my cell. They were coarse, brutal men, but they were careless. I picked up snippets of their conversations, fragments of information that painted a terrifying picture. Zhenya Krylov was ruthless, unpredictable. He was using me as a weapon against both my father and Igor, aiming to destabilize the entire underworld to claim a bigger slice for himself. They spoke of Igor's relentless pursuit, of his fury, of the unprecedented resources he was throwing into the search. "The Rostislavs are turning this city upside down," one guard grumbled, his voice rough. "Never seen Igor Rostislav this wild. He's acting like a madman." "Arkady Borodin is screaming for her too," another scoffed. "A fine mess. 2 dogs fighting over 1 bone." A fragile spark of hope began to bloom amidst my terror. Igor, he was searching for me. Not just his men, but he was turning the city upside down. He was acting like a madman. The description resonated with the boy I remembered, the fierce, protective devotion that had once been his defining trait. Could it be true? Could he truly care? Or was it merely his possessive rage, his desire to retrieve his property? I didn't know, but the mere thought that he might be desperate, that he might genuinely be afraid for me, was a tiny, precious solace. One afternoon, I heard a new voice, low and dangerous, giving orders outside my cell. Zhenya Krylov, the man my father so feared. He spoke of leverage, of demands, of how my capture would bring both Arkady and Igor to their knees. He was a predator, relishing his power. I pressed myself against the cold stone wall, my heart hammering against my ribs, terrified he would discover my secret, terrified of what he would do if he knew I carried Igor's child. The days crawled on. My strength slowly returned, though my leg remained a constant ache. I exercised my fingers, my arms, trying to keep my body strong for the baby. I ate the bland food, forced myself to drink, knowing I needed to survive for us both. The whispers from outside continued, fragments about Igor's relentless pursuit, about Vladislav's men being everywhere, about Arkady's frantic pleas. The hunt was closing in. I could feel it. The tension in the air was palpable, sharp as a drawn knife. One night, the muffled sounds of shouting, then gunshots, shattered the oppressive quiet of the complex. My heart leaped into my throat, the clanging of metal, the shouts of men, closer now than distant. A battle. Were they here? Were they fighting over me? The factory became a cacophony of violence. Fear, blinding and raw, consumed me. I curled into a tight ball on my cot, my arms wrapped around my stomach, pressing, protecting, whispering frantic, silent prayers to the tiny life within. Please, protect us. Please. The fate of my child, my secret burden, depended on forces far beyond my control, and I could only wait.
Chapter 24. The night air was a knife, sharp and cold against my face as we approached the abandoned factory complex. The intel from Arkady, combined with Vladislav's relentless tracking, had pinpointed Zhenya Krylov's stronghold. My heart hammered against my ribs, a brutal drumbeat of a million conflicting emotions. Rage, cold and precise, for Krylov. Desperate fear for Elara, a gnawing guilt for having put her in this position. The tattoo on my forearm burned, a raw, constant reminder of the boy I was, the monster I'd become, and the impossible love that now consumed me. Vladislav was beside me, a silent, imposing shadow. His men, hardened, efficient, moved with grim purpose. Arkady Borodin's remaining loyalists, a smaller, desperate force, followed reluctantly behind, their faces etched with fear and a grudging respect for the sheer scale of the Rostislav retaliation. We were a storm, converging on the factory, and there would be no survivors for those who dared to stand in our way. Entry point secured. Vladislav's voice, calm and steady, came through my earpiece. Perimeter compromised. Krylov's men are unaware. Good, I bit out, my voice raw. Move in, swift and silent. I want Krylov alive. For now. The command was laced with a chilling promise of future torment. We breached the complex like phantoms. The initial silence inside the sprawling, desolate factory was unnerving, broken only by the soft crunch of our boots on debris. Then the first gunshot ripped through the stillness. A roar, and all hell broke loose. My training, honed over years, took over. I moved with a brutal efficiency, my movements fluid, deadly. My weapon felt like an extension of my rage, each shot precise, decisive. I wasn't just fighting, I was a force of nature, driven by one singular, overriding need, to find Elara. The faces of Krylov's men, startled, defiant, then broken, blurred into a single obstacle. I moved through the chaos, Vladislav a devastating force beside me, his tattooed arms a blur of motion, his men clearing paths with ruthless efficiency. Arkady's men, though outmatched, fought with a desperate ferocity, fueled by their own master's fear for his daughter. "Clear!" Vladislav shouted, his voice echoing through a large warehouse space. "No sign of her here." My stomach clenched. "Keep moving. Where's Krylov's command?" A guard, one of Krylov's, fell before me. I seized him by the throat, slamming him against a corroded metal beam, the old factory groaning under the impact. "Where is she?" I snarled, my voice a guttural growl, the raw, unfiltered fury making him whimper. "Where is Elara Ivanova?" He stammered, fear widening his eyes. "Basement, below, offices." I dropped him, already moving, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Basement, offices. My feet pounded down a narrow, dark stairwell. Vladislav right behind me. The sounds of fighting were muffled now, distant, above us. This was it.
The muffled sounds of shouting, then gunshots, shattered the oppressive quiet of my cell. My heart leaped into my throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. They're here. They're actually here. The clanging of metal, the shouts of men, closer now, then distant. A battle. Were they fighting over me? Were they fighting for me? The factory became a cacophony of violence. Each distant crack and boom, a terrifying heartbeat. Fear, blinding and raw, consumed me, mingling with a desperate, fragile hope. I curled into a tight ball on my cot, my arms wrapped around my stomach, pressing, protecting, whispering frantic, silent prayers to the tiny life within. Please, protect us. Please. My broken leg throbbed with renewed agony, a dull, persistent ache that anchored me to the terrifying reality of my situation. I could hear footsteps above, heavy and numerous, then the sickening thuds of bodies. It was chaos. A moment later, the sounds of struggle seemed to shift, growing louder, closer to my cell. My breath hitched. Was it Genya Krylov's men, coming to finish me? Or were they... A brutal kick splintered the flimsy wooden door of my cell. Splinters flew, and a figure, tall and dark, burst into the dim room. My eyes, wide with terror, struggled to focus through the gloom. It wasn't Krylov, it was Igor. He stood silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor, his face grim, a raw, terrifying intensity in his eyes that I had never seen before. He was bleeding from a cut above his brow, his clothes torn, but he was here. He was fighting. For me. For us. He swept his gaze around the small, cold cell, his eyes landing on me. And then the mask of indifference that he had worn for so long, that hard, impenetrable shell, shattered. I saw it. Raw, desperate fear, and something else. A profound, agonizing relief. It was the boy I remembered. The one who had always protected me. He ran to me, kneeling beside my cot, his hands reaching for me, trembling. "Elara," he whispered, his voice rough, broken, completely unlike the cold, dismissive tone he had used for months. He reached for my face, his fingers, usually so cold and unfeeling, now warm and gentle against my cheek, wiping away the dirt and tears. My God, are you all right? Are you hurt? My vision blurred with tears, a sudden, overwhelming surge of relief. Igor? I choked out, my voice raw, barely a whisper. My leg, it's broken. Just then, Vladislav appeared in the doorway, his own face grim, but a flash of relief crossed his features as his eyes landed on me. Igor, we need to move, he urged, his voice low. Krylov's forces are regrouping. We still need to confirm Zhenya's position. Igor didn't look away from me. He simply nodded, his jaw tight. Get her out, he commanded, his gaze still fiercely protective. He reached down, carefully scooping me into his arms. The sudden movement sent a jolt of pain through my broken leg, but I clung to him, burying my face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him. Smoke, sweat, and something else. Something uniquely him that spoke of home and safety. My arms instinctively wrapped around him, pressing my stomach to his body, a silent, desperate prayer for the fragile life within. He didn't know. Not yet. But in his arms, amidst the chaos and the lingering fear, I felt, for the first time in what felt like forever, truly safe. Chapter 25. The world outside Igor's arms was a blur of chaos and fading gunshots. My broken leg throbbed, a dull, insistent ache, but it was a distant sensation compared to the overwhelming relief that flooded me. I clung to him, burying my face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of him, smoke, sweat, and something uniquely him that spoke of home and safety. My arms instinctively wrapped around him, pressing my stomach to his body, a desperate, silent prayer for the fragile life within. He didn't know. Not yet. But in his arms, amidst the chaos and the lingering fear, I felt, for the first time in what felt like forever, truly safe. He carried me through the wreckage of the factory, his steps firm, despite the battle he had just endured. I felt his muscles tense, his breath ragged against my hair. He was hurt, I realized, the cut above his brow a dark slash against his pale skin. But his grip on me was fierce, possessive, a stark contrast to the cold indifference he had shown for months. This was the boy I remembered, the one who had always protected me, who had fought for me. It was confusing, terrifying, and utterly, desperately welcome. We emerged into the cool night air where the remaining Rostislav and Borodin men were securing the perimeter, their faces grim but victorious. My father, Arkady, rushed forward, his face etched with a raw, desperate fear I had never seen before. "Elara!" he cried, his voice breaking. He reached for me, but Igor merely tightened his grip, turning slightly, shielding me from him. A silent, potent message passed between the two men. Arkady stopped, defeated, his hand falling. Then Vladislav was there, his grim face etched with relief. He met Igor's gaze, a silent communication passing between the brothers, one of shared triumph and unspoken understanding. "Zhenya Krylov?" Igor's voice was a low growl, cold and lethal once more. Vladislav nodded, a grim satisfaction on his face. Secured, he won't be harming anyone else. The finality in his tone, the dark glint in his eye, left no doubt about Krylov's fate. A tremor of fear, then a wave of exhaustion, washed over me. It was over. Igor carried me to a waiting armored vehicle. The interior was soft, warm, a sanctuary after the brutality of the factory. He laid me gently on the cushioned seat, his hands surprisingly tender as he adjusted a blanket over me. His gaze, once so cold and empty, was now filled with a raw, searching intensity that made my heart ache. Are you really all right?" he murmured, his voice rough, thick with genuine concern. He was kneeling beside me, his eyes scanning every inch of my face, my arms, as if memorizing every bruise, every cut. His touch was light, tentative, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. The tenderness was so overwhelming, so utterly unexpected, that it brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Just my leg, and I'm so cold." My body began to tremble, not from fear, but from the sudden release of adrenaline, from the raw emotional exhaustion. He covered me more securely, his movements quick, efficient, yet gentle. His gaze lingered on my face, then dropped, almost inadvertently, to my abdomen. My breath hitched. My hands flew instinctively to cover the slight swell, a desperate, futile attempt to hide the secret that had sustained me through the terror of captivity. Too late. His eyes, dark and sharp, instantly followed my movement. His brow furrowed, a sudden, stark realization dawning in their depths. The tenderness vanished, replaced by a stunned, almost horrified disbelief. He reached out, his hand hovering over my stomach, then slowly, tentatively, pressing against the barely discernible curve. "Elara," he whispered, his voice a raw, choked sound, utterly devoid of recognition. You're pregnant." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of profound shock.
The chaos of the factory floor faded into the periphery as I carried Elara out, her fragile weight in my arms both a crushing burden and a profound relief. My rage, a consuming inferno just moments ago, had twisted into a terrifying, protective grip. She was alive. She was safe. That was all that mattered. Vladislav confirmed Zhenya Krylov's capture, a grim satisfaction in his voice that I echoed. The monster who had dared to touch what was mine, who had dared to hurt her, was dealt with. Justice. A swift, brutal one. But even that didn't fill the hollow ache. I laid Elara gently in the armored vehicle, my hands surprisingly tender as I adjusted the blanket around her. My gaze raked over her, searching for any deeper injuries beyond the obvious ones. The bruises on her arms, the angry gash on her cheek, the unnatural angle of her leg. My stomach churned with a fresh wave of self-loathing. This was my doing, my calculated cruelty. My relentless pursuit of vengeance against Arkady had left her vulnerable, had led her here to this brutal, physical torment. The tattoo on my arm burned with a shame so profound it felt like a brand. Are you really all right?" I murmured, my voice rough, thick with genuine concern, utterly unlike the cold, detached tone I had used with her for months. I knelt beside her, my fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Her skin was cool now, but still too pale. "Yes," she whispered, her voice raw. "Just my leg, and I'm so cold." She was trembling. I pulled the blanket tighter, the urge to simply hold her, to absorb her tremors, almost overwhelming. My gaze lingered on her face. Then, almost without conscious thought, it dropped to her hands. They were clasped over her stomach, a small, protective gesture. And then I saw it. The faint, barely perceptible swell beneath her dress. A shape, a curve that was not hers alone. My breath hitched, a cold, terrifying realization dawning in my mind, even as my heart seemed to stop. My hand reached out, hovering, trembling, before slowly, tentatively pressing against her abdomen. The softness beneath my palm, the faint, undeniable curve. My blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. "Elara," I whispered, my voice a raw, choked sound, utterly devoid of anything but profound, absolute shock. You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a terrifying, earth-shattering realization. Her eyes, wide and filled with unshed tears, finally met mine, and in their depth I saw it all. The fear, the vulnerability, and the confirmation. She didn't have to say a word. The truth slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. A child, my child, growing inside her, from that night, from my act of cruel, possessive vengeance. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. The world tilted. All the hatred, all the revenge, all the meticulously constructed walls around my heart crumbled into dust. The pain I had inflicted on her, the coldness, the humiliation, it was no longer just about her or Arkady. It was about this innocent life, a life I had created out of a brutal act of supposed hatred, a life I had endangered. I stood there, reeling, utterly overwhelmed. The silence in the car was deafening, filled only by the rapid beat of my own heart. Zhenya Krylov was dealt with. Arkady Borodin was broken, but the true reckoning had just begun. And its name was Elara, and the child she carried.
Chapter 26. The dacha, once a gilded cage, transformed into a meticulous, almost clinical infirmary. Days blurred into a hazy landscape of pain, medicine, and the unnerving, constant presence of Igor. My broken leg, now properly set and cast, screamed with a dull, persistent ache that anchored me to the present. My body, still weak from the ordeal of abduction and the fragile life growing within, slowly began to knit itself back together. But my mind, my heart, remained a tangled knot of confusion and profound distrust. Igor was a different man. The ice in his eyes had melted, replaced by a raw, searching intensity that unsettled me more than his previous cruelty. He was overtly caring, relentlessly attentive. He arranged for the best doctors, Russian and international, who flitted in and out of my room like anxious birds. He supervised my medication, ensured I ate, even sat by my bedside for hours, sometimes just watching me sleep, sometimes murmuring low, rough questions about my comfort, my pain. He spoke to me directly, not through servants. His touch, when it came, was gentle, tentative, infinitely tender as he adjusted my blankets or smoothed a stray hair from my brow. It was the touch of the boy I remembered, the one who had once promised me forever. But every act of tenderness, every soft murmur, was tainted by the memory of his past cruelty. I saw the genuine concern in his eyes, felt the sincerity in his touch, but my wounded heart screamed a silent protest. It's too late. It's another game. Don't trust him. How could I reconcile the man who spoon-fed me broth with such desperate care with the man who had publicly paraded other women, whose laugh had echoed with a mistress on our wedding night, the man whose words, "She is no one," still tore through my soul, and the kiss? That brutal, possessive claim in the master bedroom, followed by his chilling dismissal of the tattoo's meaning, of us. The memory of that violation, the fear that still clung to me from that night, made every gentle touch feel like a trap. My pregnancy, once my terrifying secret, was now a shared reality. Igor had been stunned by the revelation in the car, his face a canvas of profound shock. Since then, he hadn't mentioned it directly, not in words, but his eyes, when they rested on my abdomen, held a new, overwhelming weight. Responsibility. Awe. A desperate, almost frantic protectiveness. This new vigilance, however, only fueled my distrust. Was this new tenderness simply a calculated response to the child? A way to secure his heir? To control me even more completely? I feared he would resent this innocent life, a physical manifestation of a night he had used to assert dominance, not to create connection. The thought that he might somehow blame the baby or use it as another weapon was a constant, gnawing anxiety. I could not bring myself to truly believe his change was real. I kept my answers short, my gaze guarded, my emotions locked away behind an impenetrable wall. I still couldn't cry, not for myself. The tears had all been shed that first night. My father, Arkady. His fate, too, unfolded in the haze of my recovery. He was not killed. Igor had spared him, but the revenge exacted was, in its own way, more brutal than death. Arkady Borodin, the formidable Don, was systematically stripped bare, every possession, every asset, every shadowy account seized, dismantled, absorbed into the Rostislav Empire, primarily managed by Vladislav. My father's wealth, his power, his very identity were meticulously ripped away. He was left with nothing but his life, and the crushing knowledge that Igor had spared him solely for my sake. It was the ultimate, profound humiliation. I had a final, difficult confrontation with him in his now barren study. He was a shell of a man, his eyes vacant, his shoulders slumped. "He took everything, Elara," he rasped, his voice a ghost of its former booming self. "Everything." "You lost it yourself, Papa," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "When you betrayed Sergei, when you betrayed me." The words tasted like ash, the culmination of years of suppressed resentment. He looked at me then, a flicker of something raw in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps even remorse. But it was fleeting. He merely turned away, lost in the wreckage of his ambition. He was now a ghost, living proof of Igor's twisted mercy, exiled to a quiet, impoverished life far from his former glory. A fate surely worse than death, for a man who craved power above all else. Vladislav oversaw his departure, a grim, efficient execution of the final terms. With Arkady gone, the last vestiges of my old life faded, leaving only this new, terrifying reality. I was Igor Rostislav's wife, mother to his child. He was outwardly attentive, patient, demonstrating a new, unfamiliar tenderness. He spoke of our child with a quiet reverence, his hand often resting on my abdomen when he thought I wasn't looking. But the wound of his past cruelty was too deep, the memory of his hatred too fresh. I saw his attempts to bridge the chasm, to earn my forgiveness, but every kind word, every gentle touch was met with my unwavering skepticism. I was a prisoner of his past actions, unable to break free, even as he seemingly tried to break free from his own. I loved him, yes, the boy he had once been, but this new Igor, this tender, attentive stranger, was a mystery I couldn't, dared not trust. Not yet. Chapter 28. The dacha felt different now. Still a cage, but the bars had shifted. Where once Igor's presence had been oppressive weight, now it was something else. Constant, yes, but no longer crushing. He spoke to me directly now. No more messages filtered through servants, no more cold dismissals. His voice carried genuine concern, rough edges smoothed by something that looked like desperation. When he adjusted my blankets or brought me water, his hands moved with careful tenderness, as if I might shatter at his touch. Every act of kindness was a knife between my ribs. My mind couldn't reconcile this man with the stranger who'd taken me on our wedding night, who'd whispered, "You are mine," like a curse, who'd let another woman's laughter echo through these walls while I bled inside. The memory of his words about the tattoo, possession and nothing more, still burned. How could the same hands that had gripped me with such calculated cruelty now brush hair from my forehead like I was precious? How could the same mouth that had spoken such brutal dismissals now read me Pushkin with quiet reverence? "It's too late," my wounded heart whispered. "It's another game. Don't trust him." But when his hand rested on my abdomen, thinking I wasn't looking, feeling for the faint life growing there, something inside me wavered. I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. That I might resent this child. That I might use it as a weapon the way he'd used me. I kept my walls high, answers short, gaze guarded. The tears had all been shed that first night, leaving only dry, aching emptiness. He never lost patience, never demanded, simply offered over and over, like water wearing down stone. And I, prisoner of his past cruelty, desperate for glimpses of the boy I'd once loved, found myself caught between desperate hope and terrified disbelief.
The dacha had become my purgatory. Elara was healing, bones mending, strength returning, but her eyes still held Arctic distrust. Every glance was a reminder of what I'd destroyed. Every flinch when I moved too quickly was another scar on my conscience. The pregnancy had shattered me completely, our child. The reality of it hit like a physical blow, demolishing every wall I'd built around my heart. All my careful vengeance against Arkady turned to ash in my mouth. What did any of it matter now? I arranged for the best doctors, supervised her medication myself, sat vigil by her bedside, watching her sleep, counting each breath like a prayer. Sometimes I'd murmur questions about her comfort, desperate for connection, for any crack in the ice between us. But every gentle touch was met with skepticism, every soft word with guarded silence. "It's too late. It's another game." I could read the thoughts in her eyes as clearly as if she'd spoken them. How could she trust the man feeding her broth when that same man had paraded other women like trophies? How could she believe in tenderness from hands that had claimed her so brutally? The worst part, she was right to doubt me. Arkady was gone now, stripped bare, exiled to obscurity. Vladislav had handled the final details with typical efficiency. The Rostislav Empire stood stronger than ever. But victory tasted like poison. I'd won everything and lost what mattered most. So I began the hardest campaign of my life. No financial maneuvers, no strategic calculations, just trying to earn back what I'd destroyed. I dismissed the other women, all of them, canceled endless meetings, learned her routines, her preferences, the books she loved. I read the Russian poetry I'd once used as a weapon, trying to understand her world, to bridge the chasm my cruelty had carved. Vulnerability was foreign territory, terrifying. But I forced myself to speak, halting confessions of past pain, explanations of how Arkady's betrayal had twisted everything, including the tattoo that had once symbolized love. "I was blind, Elara," I said one evening, her face turned away from mine, consumed by hatred that poisoned everything I touched. "I saw you as an instrument of revenge, not the woman I'd once promised forever to." My voice cracked. "I never meant to break you, but I broke us both." She listened without responding, never smiled, never reached for me. But she didn't pull away either. It was enough, for now. Each day I chipped away at the wall between us, reading Pushkin aloud, sharing memories of our childhood, not as weapons but as offerings, hoping to kindle some spark in her guarded eyes. The weight was agony, but I deserved every moment of it. I'd shattered her into pieces. Now I would spend whatever time it took, years, decades, a lifetime, putting her back together. The tattoo on my arm still burned, but the fire had changed. No longer the cold flame of hatred, but something warmer, fragile, hope.
3 weeks into this new reality, something shifted. I'd been watching him read, Pushkin again, his deep voice filling the silence, when he looked up and caught me staring. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. Not the cold, calculated expression I'd grown used to, but something smaller, uncertain, real. "You hate this poem," he said quietly. "I remember, you always said Pushkin was too dramatic." Despite everything, my lips twitched. Still do. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months, the first crack in my armor. He set the book aside. "What would you prefer?" "Akhmatova," I said without thinking. then froze, waiting for him to dismiss me to turn it into another power play. Instead, he nodded. "I'll find her collected works tomorrow." And he did. Small gestures. Tiny surrenders. The slow, painful work of rebuilding trust from ashes. I wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't sure I ever would be. But for the first time since our wedding night, I wasn't entirely convinced this was just another game. The child growing inside me deserved better than parents trapped in endless cycles of hurt and revenge. Maybe that was reason enough to try. Maybe. Chapter 29. 8 months. My body had grown heavy with our child, movements careful and measured. The physical wounds had healed, bones mended, bruises faded to nothing, but the deeper scars remained, though their edges had softened under Igor's relentless campaign of tenderness. He never wavered, never faltered in his quiet devotion. Flowers appeared daily, white snowdrops for new beginnings, thornless roses soft against my cheek. But always, always, the midnight irises. His hand would rest on my swollen abdomen when he thought I wasn't watching, voice dropping to whispered promises I pretended not to hear. "Your mama is the strongest woman I know. I'm going to spend every day proving I deserve her." His confessions had worn down my defenses like water on stone. The tattoo's true meaning, how love had been buried under layers of skulls and thorns, twisted by grief into something monstrous. His father's betrayal, Arkady's treachery, the blinding need for justice that had warped him into the very thing he'd sought to destroy. I saw the genuine remorse in his eyes now, felt sincerity in every careful touch. The ice around my heart had begun its slow thaw. It wasn't surrender, it was choice. The baby moved constantly now, reminding me that this child deserved more than parents trapped in cycles of hurt. My stubborn love for Igor, buried but never dead, had begun to resurface like spring breaking through winter soil. One afternoon in the sunroom, spring light streaming through windows, he knelt before me. Golden hour softened his harsh features, made him look almost like the boy I'd once known. The velvet box in his hands made my breath catch. "Elara." His voice was raw, vulnerable in a way that still surprised me. The first time was a claim. Brutal vengeance disguised as marriage. "I stole everything you deserved, the white dress, the joy, the choice." His gaze held mine, steady and honest. "I broke you. I broke us both." The ring inside wasn't a diamond. It was intricately woven platinum embedded with tiny midnight irises, their deep purple matching his tattoo. Subtle emeralds surrounded them like new leaves, hinting at growth, at hope. "This isn't forced alliance," he continued, voice thick with emotion. "This isn't strategy or control. This is redemption. Everything I couldn't be then, everything I want to be now." He looked up, those familiar luminous eyes now blazing with desperate love. "Our child will be born soon, Elara. I want them to enter a world where their mother knows she's cherished, where they can see love, not conquest." His hands trembled slightly. "I know I'll spend a lifetime making amends, but I want to start now. I want our baby to know their parents chose each other, that their mother was loved, truly, desperately loved." Hot tears finally came, not of pain but relief, hope, love rediscovered. My hand found his, trembling but sure. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, Igor. For us, for them."
The word yes hit me like absolution. Not the roar of conquest or the satisfaction of revenge, just the quiet sound of a heart deciding to trust again. It filled the hollow spaces in my chest with warmth so overwhelming I nearly collapsed. Months of penance had led to this moment. Arkady was long gone, stripped of everything, exiled to obscurity. That vengeance felt like a fever dream now, meaningless compared to earning Elara's forgiveness. I'd dismantled every public cruelty, dismissed every woman, contracted my empire to focus solely on what mattered: her recovery, our child, this fragile chance at redemption. The vulnerability had been terrifying, years of armor stripped away, leaving only raw honesty. I'd confessed everything, the tattoo's corruption from love to hatred, the betrayal twisting me into something monstrous. How I'd used her as an instrument when she'd been the only pure thing in my poisoned world. I was blind, I'd told her countless times, consumed by hatred that infected everything I touched. Each confession was met with guarded silence, each gesture of care with cautious acceptance, but she never pulled away, never stopped listening. Now, kneeling before her, 8 months pregnant, glowing with new life, I poured out everything left in my soul. "Our child deserves better than the shadow of what I did to you," I said, slipping the ring onto her finger. They deserve to see their mother loved, cherished, chosen freely, not claimed like property. The midnight irises caught the light, their purple depths matching the ink on my arm. But where the tattoo had burned with hatred, now it warmed with something infinitely more powerful. Love, redemption, hope. I know I'll need a lifetime to earn your full trust again. I whispered, bringing her hand to my lips, but I want to start now. I want our baby born into love, not the wreckage of my revenge. Her yes was everything I'd never dared hope for. The tattoo no longer burned, it glowed. My past hadn't been erased, but it no longer defined our future. We would build something new from the ashes of what I'd destroyed. Our child would know love, not conquest, and maybe, given enough time and devotion, Elara would know it too.
The ring felt warm on my finger as Igor helped me to the window. Outside, the dacha's gardens burst with spring life, hope made visible. "When?" I asked softly. "Tomorrow, if you'll have me. Or whenever you're ready." His hand covered mine over my swollen belly. "I just want it done before they arrive. I want our child born to parents who chose each other." I felt the baby shift as if responding to their father's voice. Soon, very soon, this little life would enter the world. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Tomorrow, I decided, just us. Something real this time. His smile could have powered Moscow. Something real. For the first time in months, I smiled back. Real. Yes, we could build something real from the ruins of what we'd been. Our child deserved nothing less. And so, love conquered the legacy of blood and betrayal, proving that even the deepest wounds can heal when two hearts choose forgiveness over vengeance. The end. This is me, Vivian Solis, signing off, and I'll see you next Friday for another tale of passion, redemption, and the power of love to transform even the darkest of hearts.